Okay, calling to order the January 10th, 2023 meeting of the Manchester Essex Regional School District School Committee. We will begin with public comment. As a reminder, the public comment and public participation information can be found in policy sections BEDH and BEDHE. If anyone attending virtually would like to make a public comment, please put your name and address in the chat. Is the chat open? Yep, it is. And only your name and address in the chat, and then the chat will be closed after public comment. Is anyone in person here to make a public comment? No. Anyone in the chat currently? I don't see, the chat's not open, so I can't really see it.
I put my name in, if that's okay. It's Nina.
Please, thank you. Go ahead, Nina.
Hi, I actually had two kind of quick questions. One was just, I know right before the holiday break, it seemed that there was some, maybe a few more times where at least Libby was having no substitute teacher, just going to the library. But since we've been back for school these past week and a half, it's a similar thing, but more so she's mentioned some classmates. I've been helping carpool for the swim team, and I've heard others mention as well that they, I guess yesterday someone went to school all day and only had one class. And so it's sort of that same thing. I know it's come up at times, but what we're doing for substitute policy or making it so that if there is no teacher available, it's not just a 10 to 15 minute packet and then, there's nothing going on. The other, because I know there's no dialogue, I don't mean it that way. The other is because it came up in the last meeting and I meant to email, and I can certainly do that if it's easier, with the school committee giving permission for the potential overseas trips. It would just be great if there'd be information on the website. I'll leave it at that. But also, again, carpooling some kids, there's some concern as to that because it's not offered every year, it means actually certain grades aren't able to actually participate. If I understood Libby, she's a sophomore this year, so this year there is no foreign trip. So next year, April 24, potentially there'd be a trip to April. She takes French, maybe she'd want to go on the trip. Seniors get preference. So I can't imagine the trip's going to be able to take 30 or 40 kids. And then her senior year, there's no trip offered. So I know one or two of school committee members had mentioned it prior that making sure it's equitable as a whole, obviously there's a big cost, but I didn't realize how sort of constrictive the potential trips were. And I don't think there's a lot of information for parents to know about them as well.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you. And I know you know the drill here, but sometimes Pam chooses to address things in her report or during comment. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, all good.
Is there anyone else in the chat? Again, it's not listed, so I can't see it.
I don't see anyone.
No. I'm just looking on here. Okay. You don't see anyone else listed? Okay. Seeing no further public comment, we will close that and move into student report. Diego.
Well, I guess both of the topics from the public comment, I think I kind of have an experience with too. The first one with the teachers not being here. I think this week I had one teacher that wasn't here, and then in the past I had a couple teachers that were out. And I know at least for me and a lot of my friends, we've had a lot of work during those blocks. I mean, I think it obviously varies, but it kind of seems like everyone is doing stuff in the library, especially juniors, sophomores, and freshmen who don't have teachers here. Everyone's getting their work done. Also, I didn't know that there were even supposed to be substitute teachers in the classroom, because the majority, I would say, I think every single time that I had a teacher out, I just went to the library anyway. So I thought that was the default. I didn't know that some classes were getting substitutes to begin with. So I don't know. I guess that's maybe a question for Ms. Puglisi. And then the other thing about the Spain trip, I went on the Spain trip. But I wouldn't worry too much about not having the opportunity to go, because at least when I went to Spain as a sophomore with juniors and seniors as well. And there was no problem for me really getting into the trip at all. If you are really interested in it and you go to the information meeting early and you sign up for the trip early, in my experience, and other sophomores as well last year that went, it really was not difficult to go at all. So I don't really think that there should be too much of an issue unless something changes next year with juniors and sophomores being able to go on the trip. So I don't know. Maybe that's helpful. more like generally, I think like the first thing that's kind of relevant to today's agenda was the going over like the course of studies, and like all like the new classes and stuff. I know the students were sent out a form showing all of the new classes that could potentially be offered, and like it was pretty cool. Everyone was really enthusiastic about all the new options that were offered, and people are already talking about like which classes they're going to take next year and which new electives, and they all seem pretty interesting, and everyone voted on it. So I think it was pretty cool that we get to choose the classes that we take next year. Um, and I look forward to seeing the presentation because I know there's kind of like different things people want to like add and get rid of. And I know we talked about it the last time we all met as a group. But I would say like just asking the students and keeping them involved as much as possible is like, I would say the most helpful because obviously like I like kids want, like, I want to be choosing the class that I take next year. And I feel like everyone wants to have a voice in what happens. And like, at the end of the day, like we are the ones taking the classes. So I think like as much student input as possible is definitely helpful. And then another thing we talked about was I kind of talked about what I'm doing with the ADL. I'm a part of the ADL, like, I guess, I don't know, chapters, maybe the right word, at the school. And today, actually, we just finished up our last of 3 in-school workshops. And then in the coming months, we're gonna go and talk to the freshmen about a variety of topics. And I've kind of been talking to everyone in the ADL, and I would like to, I think have a couple kids come with me to the next school committee meeting and kind of talk exactly about what we're doing. I know like we were talking about potentially, like, talking to the principal or something. So I look forward to kind of talking to everyone and including the teachers organizing it and coming up with like a little presentation for the school committee. Because I think there's a lot of things that they talk about that like could potentially be addressed here as well as like issues in the school that maybe,
Yeah.
everyone else has some input in.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, I know we had, I don't know how many of you are familiar with our school's DECA program. I don't do DECA personally, but a bunch of my friends do. It's kind of like a business marketing class that also has a competition involved. And yesterday our school went to it was a regionals competition. And then all of the kids, if you qualified top 4 above in your event, you went to states. And I think this year we had like, oh my gosh, I don't know, like how many?
34. Over 40.
It's like over 40, like 47 kids
Yeah.
make it to states. And then I think last year, how many would it have been? 1, 2, 3. I think like 4 or 5 kids made it to internationals last year. So like our school is like really successful in DECA. It's pretty cool. I was looking at the score sheets last night and it's crazy how many kids from Manchester like were winning events. And it was like there'd be one event where it'd be like the top 2 or 3 kids were from Manchester. So that was definitely pretty cool to see. And I think it's cool. It should be like, acknowledged because they all work super hard for it. And then outside of that, I mean, basketball team is doing good. Everyone like goes to the games. It's wicked fun. I really like those. And that's kind of all I have today.
Excellent. Go Manchester Essex.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Go get to that game, Diego. You're on its way.
Does anyone have questions for Diego? No, we just like hearing about all the good stuff going on. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
for
you.
sure.
Are you sticking around for this or are you heading straight out?
I want to see.
Basketball.
It's here.
Busy down there.
Oh, wait, the agenda was different on mine.
Was it?
There was oh, never mind. Yeah,
Right there.
I'd like to stay for
Staying
that.
for that.
Scaring me.
Beautiful.
No,
I know, right?
I didn't see it. I was like, oh, oops.
It's there. It's there. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
And thanks for your
It is. It was
representation
intended for that purpose, but it was
of your role here in your other roles as well. I think that's really helpful and something to be commended.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so chairman's report. So my report right now, obviously I attended that student advisory committee meeting and we had some great conversation, which Diego just reported on, which is good. So my report is basically just starting the new year, a show of gratitude to our committee members who put in our time and efforts in an unpaid and frequently difficult and challenging role. And so thank you all for doing that. Thanks in the new year to Pam and Avi for sticking with us as we learn the ropes and continue to move forward and do our best. And thanks to all our administration, teachers, and other staff for everything they've put in, and thanks to our community members who pay attention and stay engaged and help us navigate this. It's just a show of thanks as we start the new year. We still have a lot ahead of us, but we've covered a lot of ground so far too. So thank you all. Consent agenda. Okay, we have on the consent agenda today the acceptance of the warrants for the vouchers 1031, 1032, and 1033. And then we also have minutes from 12:06 and 12:14. And I know that it was a really long packet and we had a lot to go through. So my question is, did everyone have a chance to review the minutes? Yes. Okay, good. So we can keep it together then. All right. So I will entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
So much.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. So moved by Erica, and second by Kate. Any discussion? Any questions about anything?
How do I abstain from just the 12-14 minutes because I wasn't present? Or can I? Or just abstain from the whole thing?
Either way.
We could simply note on the record that you're abstaining from the vote
Okay.
on the minutes of the 14th.
Okay.
Perfect. Excellent.
Happy, would you just speak to the redundant entries?
And
Yeah.
yes, so I was gonna bring that up, thank you. So Jake, with the eagle eye, did catch something which I appreciate. There is we have some transfer information. The first two vouchers are transfer reimbursements of the middle school checking account, so from the student activity checking account. And there is a subsequent void that happened for one of the checks. So I think that amount was 1,950. And because that that transfer these transfers happen in real time, and then we provide the information to school committee, kind of like payroll process. But because we have that item that's being voided out, we're gonna have to reduce the next transfer request by that amount. So on the next time you see a middle school transfer, you'll just see 1,950 deducted from the total request. So they'll sum the checks, take out the 1950, that'll be the new amount. So that happened after the items were sent in, that basically we have Tom who works with me in accounting, works with the principals to make sure that their accounting is all reconciled. And so he caught it, didn't get to update me. I sent it out, Jake caught it, so thank you.
That's the system working as it should, right?
Mhm.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Shall we note $7,000 raised by the middle school for the American Red Cross is something to, something noteworthy. Great job. Any other questions about the consent agenda?
Avi, on voucher 1033.
Yeah.
We had the sped contracted services with that SLP line that we had also had on the prior.
Yes.
Voucher. Can you just go through sort of how we decide when we're going to use contracted services versus a full-time hire? How often we review that, and where the sort of contract rate for those services comes from?
Yep. And I touched on this a little bit in my memo, but I think your question gets into a couple other aspects of it, so glad you asked. Basically, if we were going to bring a position in-house, first of all, it would come through the budget process as a budget request. And typically that would happen when we see that the caseload for a service, and by the way, umbrella topic, we're talking about what's known as capital RS related services. It's an area of special ed that is not direct teacher instruction, but it could be provided by a related service like speech language pathology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, audiology. Those are the big categories. And those needs are all based on the summation of students' individualized education plan, IEPs. And so those needs can change from time to time throughout the year. And so there's some baseline amount that we typically need. And so that would be something that we would carry through our in-district staff. And then if, for example, the service caseload is growing over time, and we started to see that through the year, the student services department might flag that for us and say, we'd like to make a budget request to bring a position in-house. Short of that, when needs are transient, short-term, or indeterminate amount of time, that's where a contracted services professional will be more appropriate. And we've had some caseload where it's been just too little to bring somebody on staff. So we've never had an on-staff physical therapist, for example, although we do have fractional occupational therapists. So that's kind of how we make the decision. And then in terms of the rate, we go to the market at the time that we are looking for the service. And so sometimes that can really impact the rate. And I think in the memo, I talked about how the rates were pretty consistent with some of the longstanding staff. We have a new contracted service provider that we're using in the SLP area, and that rate has been quite a bit higher. So I think that that's certainly something that we would look at in terms of, can we continue to look in the market and find a rate that's more affordable? Obviously, you need to get a person who's skilled and who can do the job well as well. So those are my thoughts. I don't know if you have anything else you would want to add to that from your more curricular oriented mind versus the financial side.
No, no, other than that sometimes it's the urgency of the need. And I would say right now, the lack of, the market's driving. The market and the hiring pool are kind of driving the rates right now. But I think you covered it.
Yeah, the only other thing I would just say for people who aren't as familiar with this, generally, if you look at the outsourced contracted rate for the temporary or small needs, that doesn't come with benefits or any of that stuff. So you compare that to a person who's on staff who gets the full benefits.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. No other questions? All in favor? Aye, aye, aye. That's unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
Subcommittee reports. Facilities, we have not met. We have not met since last time. There is an SBC meeting coming up on 1/17. Is there anything we need to know
Teresa?
currently? Oh, sure.
I know you probably anticipate what this is, but I know you were expecting the Habib report end of December. Do you have an update on when we'll
I
see that?
do. In fact, it took a little more time, but we just had a conference call with them today, our second since they presented, to go kind of line by line through anything and updates. And so we've done 2 detailed reviews of all the data, asking them to make sure that anything that we might have seen that didn't come in the report is in there, going through some of the cost estimates. They also did tell us that because they continue to see new data coming through, I think the cost per data for a lot of that was based off of whatever they had in the summer when they started the project. They have some updated rates for some of the information, so that's going to flow through.
Projection of when it'll be done?
Yes, sorry, this month. This month, I'm expecting a final draft within 1 to 2 weeks, and so I told them I need that final in budget season because it's so important, and that might be what you're getting at.
That would help, yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Can I just ask anybody at home, please mute your devices? Thank you. Go ahead, Erica.
And did the turf fields go out to bid?
The advertisement went to the newspaper today. It's getting published on Thursday. And so those will be available for pickup a week from Thursday. We have to advertise 1 week in advance. So it's happening as we speak.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
Ready to pair.
Is that,
We got it.
thank you. Finance Subcommittee met yesterday. Anna, do you want to speak to that? And I'll speak to collaboration.
Sure. Where do I start? So we went over the budget.
Brief, yeah.
At the summary budget line items, we didn't go into the school budget pages, but at a high level, we went through all the different lines. We discussed about why some of the budget lines are budgeted consistently budgeted high compared to actual, for example, insurance. But we're waiting for the insurance rate to come in the next few weeks now, so that will probably bring the cost down or change the cost, which is change the budget either way. We also look at the enrollment changes, and then I think we identify some other grades enrollment also changed significantly. Just looking at the trend, 11th and 10th grade, I think, and also for the last few years, 9th grade now. So something that you guys are gonna look into. We talk about the capital budget. Right now, the capital budget is not budgeting the sales of the bond, which I've asked, maybe Avi can look into that. So we are now running a 400K variance, different fiscal years. And I know that you will require working with both towns about, what we want to do. Anything that I missed?
We're going to go into most of what we talked about yesterday too,
Yeah,
in
just
the
to
budget
clarify
workshop.
the capital budget.
Please.
we're required to have a spending budget that's voted, and so we will always have that. There's actually typically zero variance on the spending budget. But what we don't do is pre-estimate what the bids will come out and how much of a premium there will be, really, which is just a technical term for, how much extra we get from borrowers. So that does show up on the revenue page as a revenue variance, and Anna caught that. And that number in some cases could be $400,000. It's a big number. And so Anna was asking a question about whether that's a concern. All of that money that we get just reduces the amount we need to borrow. So, but from a spending budget, which is really what we're required to get voted, we don't have typically variances there. And the reason is our debt service is modeled out from the date it's issued until the last day. We know ahead of time. So there tend to be very little surprises in that budget. But the premium and the revenue side, as Anna mentioned, shows up some numbers where I think a person who might not be as familiar with it would say that's a big variance. Where's that come from?
And like you said, we're going to go through a lot of what we discussed yesterday, but it's nice for the finance subcommittee to have that preview. Reporting out on collaboration meeting, we did meet on December 19th, so after the budget hearing, to talk with our town partners together. A lot of the conversation naturally was about what everybody learned, when the draft budget was presented, some of the challenges that presents, and really the different ways we can deal with this, looking at what discussing together what the natural rate of growth is versus what the district has been doing to keep it down to a manageable rate, different ways of addressing it. We had Essex kind of come in with a new thought and idea about changing things so that we do use our reserves and go for capital overrides for capital projects instead. These are all ideas that we can talk through in collaboration. But the bottom line is the collaborative team right now is still just looking at how are we going to move forward and looking at some multi-year modeling so that the towns can figure out how they're going to fund this gap for the year. So that's really the bottom line of that for now. I know people will be planning to attend our next budget hearing as well. That's where I will leave it for our collaboration group. Policy subcommittee. Erica, I understand you're up.
Yeah, the policy subcommittee met and we reviewed and incorporated comments that we received, which is what you have in your second round of review. In the instance where we did not choose to incorporate comments, that was primarily due to the fact that we were tracking language in the Mass General laws and we wanted to keep that consistent with the general laws. We are next up on our agenda is Albie is working on a draft of a reserve policy using both hopefully Manchester's and Essex reserve policies as a model. And when we're done with that, we are hoping to make sure that the graduation requirements in the school committee policy mirror the program of studies. I think that's it.
Okay, so thank you. And also the next time we meet, I know we have superintendent goals on the agenda and policy subcommittee has been very busy. The financial stuff from MASC came in October and everything. It might be nice if we have a little bit of an update on some of the other things that were kind of on the plate, this food service contract, which is timely, and just the other things that we had talked about and where things stand. Status report.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be great. So looking at this second read for the financial policies as we've received. So shall we entertain a motion and then go through the process for discussion? Okay, would one of you like to make the motion?
I move that we accept the draft of the edits to the existing financial policy section. Is that correct?
Is that the right
Jake, why
language?
don't you do it?
Is that good enough?
You could just say that presenting for a second read and final approval, the financial policy updates inclusive of committee requested updates.
So just say what she said.
Just that.
What she said. That's the language of the motion.
All right, next time we'll write this out while we're meeting.
That was very much
I will second.
And Jake seconds it.
in the moment.
Okay. Any discussion? I know I have one question that I didn't get a chance to send in advance. So I wonder if you could just speak very, very briefly to the decision to table two of the options until next summer. And then I have one specific question about an issue or a provision that was made.
And just to clarify, the two options being the single signer.
Yes,
Options?
yes, yeah.
So functionally, we didn't want to disrupt our current approval processes for finances, just because we're all still learning, so many of us are new.
Yep.
And make a change like that once we're all more settled and kind of in a routine.
Great.
Then we can entertain the change to a single signer approval.
Perfect. Thank you. My question is on file DBD. That there's a revision in highlighted, you see, where it says such calendar will take into consideration the requirement that school councils, and we strike out, are to be consulted in developing school budgets and replace it with review school budget in relation to the school improvement plan. So my question is, since MASC sends these out and presumably they vet them in advance, is there a requirement that they have now referenced that we are now striking and replacing on our own? I didn't see it in MGL. I looked it up, so I just,
No, we actually went to the state resources and
Yeah.
state on that, and it is actually explicit about relative to the school improvement plan, not the overall school budget.
Okay,
So
so-
that actually reflects the guidance that is provided by the state.
okay, so this is maybe an MASC.
Better.
This is an
Seemed
improvement.
like it was
There's
better
no
'cause it's
perfect
more direct.
policies.
There's no
I think
perfect
what I'm
policy.
learning.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, okay, all right. Great. That's my only question. Did anyone else have questions about the revisions?
My question was actually on the same one and along the same lines as yours. Can you just clarify, Jake or Erica? So when it says review school budget in relation to the school improvement plan, that's a review to anticipate how the funds will support the school improvement plan versus a review to say, this isn't enough money to support this plan, or,
Not specified. That really comes down to the principal and the school council and how they want to interpret that.
okay.
Unless I'm misinterpreting your question, but Pam or Avi, you can correct me.
I'm trying to understand the question.
It's all right. I think I'm just
There's
confused
no-
about what the word review means. Like, there's no approval process, right? There's no.
They're not a budgeting
it's-
authority.
So it's really just to
Keep them
anticipate
informed.
how those funds can be used
Mhm.
towards the school improvement plan.
Yes, I think because school improvement plan is part of what they do,
Yep.
and because budgets need to support everything, including the school improvement plan, the language that we found at the state level just wants to make sure that they're brought into that process so they can understand how spending impacts the school improvement plan. That's my understanding of it. Would you say it differently, Pam?
I think whether you call it review or consult, I think that the spirit of the language is to be inclusive and informative to the school council and to seek their feedback as you're building your budget, but they're not a budget
Not
building
binding.
authority. So there's, I think, a couple of different ways you can get at that.
That's fine. It's just
So-
clarifying.
Yeah,
It's not worth
I don't
any
think
more
that there's
of
a
our time, sorry.
perfect phrase, but I think we could take it up if there's better language.
Yeah, no.
So question, are the school councils, what's the process? Are they actually reviewing something and then provide feedback? Because I thought school councils right now are not as involved as they would like to, but are they actually involved in the budget process?
My understanding is that as principals take inputs from whether it's teachers, department chairs, student activity groups, their school councils, they take inputs from all of those constituent groups as they build their budget and then review the outcomes of the budget with those different groups.
Okay.
But they are not charged with building the budget.
Yeah. It's another, I get it. I think it's important to, we don't necessarily have to change the language again, but it's important to clarify it in here. That's great. I actually do have one other question. I'm sorry, and this one was kind of important to me.
Yep.
On file DIE-1, the regional school district audits. I don't love this edit. So the edit says in second paragraph, upon the completion of each audit, the resulting report, and what it originally said was shall be made The report shall be made to the chair of the school committee and a copy sent to the chair of the select board or city council and the chair of the school committee in the member municipalities. So my reading of that is that the report is made, we know they come and present to us, right? But then a copy of that goes to the committee and a copy of that goes directly to the chairs of the municipalities. But we've struck that and just wrote and made available to the member municipalities, which to me could read just posted on the website. I think knowing how things have been in terms of communication, I think that if this is a thing that can be done and that is recommended as part of this policy change, I'd like to keep that and make sure that a copy is sent directly to the chair of the boards of selectmen on those. Is there a reason we needed to do this? What was the,
I think it's that, isn't this your standard operating procedure? I think
This is
we
how
just
it's
went
been
off the
done for Many
guidance.
years. It's
Yeah,
a,
that's
it's
how
a
they do it.
fairly public section of the area of the district budget where we have all
Yeah.
of the historical items and they're there. And so typically people, when they want to get our budget documents or our presentations or our financial results from the auditors, it's all in one place.
yeah,
So.
I'm not suggesting it shouldn't still be.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just suggesting, so was this not part of it initially? Is that the change they've made? I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Pam and Avi, is it typical for you to physically send or email a
No.
copy to? So even with,
Or do you guys?
Oh, no, and I'm not, but I'm saying if this is a suggestion
Yeah.
that is something being offered to school committees regarding regional school district audits,
It's for the
there's
group.
probably a reason
It is
for
for
it.
this group to decide. So we can tell you it hasn't been the past practice.
Mhm.
It could be the future practice. I advise the committee, whatever decision you make, just think about your chain of command and who is the official recipient of the report.
Yep.
And how you want that to play out. So if you want to add the two town boards as official recipients of the report, that's the purview of this group.
So I would suggest, given the conversations I've had with town leaders, that would be something that would be appreciated, knowing how they appreciate reporting. But if that's something that, I don't see it as being unnecessarily taxing. We could even include it as a task of the chair to then send that out, but
So I'm confused. So the way that is changed too is available to anybody.
Mhm.
So you're saying that we should only we should send it just to the chair and not make it, but it's already available. to-
I'm not suggesting
it
it
would-
shouldn't still be made
it
available.
would be made available as well. She's just saying the act of doing
Actually.
the sending is.
Good faith.
Can I,
is good.
Good-
yes,
best
and, but
practice.
also since we have members of boards of selectmen from each, could I solicit input? Is
You
that
are the
some,
chair.
is that something that as members of the boards of selectmen, you would appreciate, or are you comfortable just letting it be, it is always available in the section that we have?
I think it's a nice act of goodwill. I think that it's a communication and shows, not everybody is going to stop what they're doing to go to the website to look for it, but when we receive it, I know I make every attempt to read every single email I can, so I'm sitting here doing that now. So I think it's a nice gesture and I would appreciate it. I agree.
Okay.
All right, so I'll make a motion then under DIE-1 to not accept the proposed edits.
So return it to its
To
original
return
state.
it to its original first draft state.
I'll
Although-
second that.
With the references.
Um,
Yeah.
So he's just making a sub motion.
Right.
But and made available too, because we also want it made.
Yeah.
We
made
can keep the
publicly
and made
available.
available.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So we don't want,
That's
and
these are
practice
practice
anyway,
anyway.
which
So
is
the
practice
motion
anyway.
then is for DIE-1, we will keep the struck edits
Yeah.
along with the addition.
There we go. I'll second that. Any further discussion on it? This is just on this
It's-
portion.
We can take this up at a later time. One suggestion might be, I like the idea, it's a very easy thing
Yeah.
to do. Knowing and watching over time, we have people coming and going on committees. Is there any value in talking with our collaboration group about a memo of understanding about the sharing of the report? I just, Like, will the report now generate a request to go and present the audit? Like, there's a whole process around presenting the audit findings to the school committee,
Right.
which provides context, background, opportunities for questions.
Mhm.
Maybe just some letter of understanding that we're not going to repeat that process
Yeah.
for each board in each town 2 and 3 times.
Mhm.
That maybe it goes with an invitation to attend
Yeah.
the audit hearing.
Yeah.
So just some kind of ground rules of how to manage
Yeah.
something that could get a little big.
So Pam, you're not suggesting any edits to the
Nope.
policy, you're talking about a
Like a
practice.
side-
that
Separately,
The
we
budget
side
committee,
agreement
the
on how-
subcommittee could
how we
take up
practice
and
it. Yep.
figure out.
And since we're also talking about other kinds of reporting at collaboration group, that would fit right into that conversation.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so, so are we going to vote on the change you just
Vote on
made?
the change
All
and
right,
then vote on
and
the
then
whole
we'll
thing.
vote on the whole thing. All right, so there was a motion and a second. All in favor of making the change as he just explained?
Yes.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay. Any further discussion on the acceptance in total? All in favor of accepting? Any opposed? It's unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you all for your work on this. Much appreciation. And the quickest and easiest, negotiations.
We have not met. We meet again tomorrow.
Lovely. Excellent. Superintendent's report.
3 items with an eye to the time.
Yep.
First, we continue work on our strategic initiative around cultural competency. We had a mid-year mini retreat with Michael Eatman and the leadership team. A lot of constructive work being done to tie all of our pieces together. I think that's my excitement coming out of that meeting, which is we can now see the feathering together of the district, the strategic plan, the district improvement plan, the school improvement plans, cultural competence work, SEL work, and the grant we received on Safe Schools is kind of providing the framework to bring all pieces together. So we are, to questions that came up earlier in the year, seeing increased conversations and use of faculty meetings as learning labs with dedicated time to working through the competency framework, all in service of creating a more informed teacher force so that the work starts to permeate the classroom. So a little bit more on that on the 24th. That's my other preview. That is going to be the mid-year goals report. So we'll talk a little bit more about that there. The other thing I just wanted to bring to mind as we enter in our conversation tonight about budget is one of our key strategic initiatives is stabilizing our finances. So you're live and involved and step by step in making advancing that priority forward. And it's a twisty and windy road, but I think we are making good progress in trying to realize that goal. Within the next 10 days, we'll be putting up the posting and rolling out messaging to the community about advertising the curriculum and technology director position, putting together a team to do the interviewing and setting out a schedule with the target completion date of mid-March, as long as we can get underway quickly. So excited to get started on building the next year. And I think that's what you'll start to see in a lot of our conversation now that it's January. Reports on what we're doing this year, but also a lot of talk about what's coming up from the fall, right? Trisha's going to do the presentation of program of studies. That's the launch to scheduling for next year. So we're on to FY24. So coming up in March, we will have beginning March 7th and then continuing through end of May, the school spotlights. Right now, Essex and Memorial have asked to do it jointly so that they can show their commonalities, but also then highlight some of their special cultural differences. So they will be leading off the session on the 7th, followed by the middle school and ending with the high school and our first post-COVID science research night. So we had a tradition of having an ASR open house before a school committee meeting in the spring, and we'll be able to return that. We'll have students on hand to talk you through some of their research projects. It's really a wonderful, authentic science research is really a wonderful program that we have. It's very much in keeping with the spirit of hands-on and authentic learning. And there's nothing better than to listen to you guys tell us about the work that you're doing and educate us about topics in science I probably have no concept of. So those are just kind of the curriculum director search. That will be followed by the principal search for Essex. the spotlight presentations, and just continue to work on strategic initiatives. Very exciting things coming up this year. So that's it for tonight, unless you have specific questions about things that come up.
When you say followed by the principal search, do you mean that the curriculum director will be hired first and then we will start the principal search?
Yeah.
Is that in line with the timeline of principal hiring?
Yeah, I went back and reviewed the timelines that we used previously, and we're actually getting a 2 or 3 week head start on what we had done back in, I think it was 15 or 16, when we did the curriculum director and middle school principal search. So I think we're well within the timeframe of hiring for those roles. Yep.
All right, thank you. Okay, we are on to Principal Puglisi and the high school program of studies, which in past years has been kind of a procedural thing, recognizing that we have some new members. I know she's got a bit more detailed presentation, so we appreciate you. Come on up, please, please, come right on up.
Do you want
Yeah.
me to throw the slides up and drive them?
Yes, could you?
Please,
Junior mints? Of course.
do it.
Long term from.
Yeah, collect an assortment.
There we go.
We're gonna open the hair. What do you need? We can throw them. Aren't you sad you didn't attend in person? We're throwing candy.
I'm skilled in stopping on things.
What's that?
Sorry, they left in the back.
It's full.
Oh, it's full.
I can't really throw that. Dump them out.
Hey, Chris, come down this way when you're done. Just
Yeah.
say-
Could do
Send
it.
them down to Abby and Maria.
Date is it? Oh my God, it's only the
My
10th.
bad, everybody's-
Are you not allowing yourself something?
Lame.
Just a terrible January.
Should have brought you some broccoli.
Thank you.
Bring a veggie platter next time.
Grab two.
It'll
Thanks.
dip though.
I won't bring
Got my
it.
ass on the shirt.
You're a role model for us.
Yeah. I think I'm the one who started the candy trend, so probably not going that direction.
You want me to get the light?
Thank you.
Helpful. Yeah.
Trish, is the presentation you're giving identical to
Send those
what
down to
we
Maria and
have in
Abby.
our packet? or
Abby already took some.
Which one's better?
Some.
Follow what you're
Maria,
putting up today.
you want some?
Okay.
This one is going to help better inform the memo and kind of provide the background or the pathway we follow to get to what is proposed in the program of studies.
Perfect. I
Great.
just wanted to make sure I was looking at the right thing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Ready?
Yep.
We can jump ahead one. We don't even.
There we go.
look at that one.
It was a very nice cover sheet.
Thank you. I worked hard on that. Okay, so again, what I'm proposing tonight is the program of studies for next year. We start scheduling actually the end of January, beginning of February, when we start course selection with our 12th graders working down through our 11th graders working down through our 8th graders, which is generally completed by March. Following that, we begin the build of the schedule, which takes a little bit of time. We focus on looking at what students actually selected in their course selection, and then determine the number of sections and courses run based on that student interest. So that's where we need to start. So what the program of studies or the course of studies provide is it kind of outlines our graduation requirements, recommendations for post-secondary planning, an explanation of our special programs such as Green Team, work studies for DECA and debate, course descriptions for each course, a 4-year planning guide, and also our academic policies. So that's kind of the meat of what's in there. Where are you going?
Sorry.
How it's developed. So it's been developed, this document itself has been developed over time. So we don't start from scratch each year. We amend the document that's been in place. and it's updated to reflect either new course pathways, graduation requirements, or new courses that we'd like to add to the program. In the fall, I asked department chairs to propose any new courses that they'd like to see, and we added a little extra onto that this year that I'll talk about in a minute. And also included in that would be any budgetary considerations that need to be addressed in terms of will the budget support this new course. So that happens about starting in October. The department head team then meets to review the proposed courses and determine which would be our best fit. This year we had a large number of new course proposals. So as Diego was saying, we thought this is an opportune time for student voice and what is it that they would like to see. So we did provide those descriptions to students and asked them to vote on the two that would most interest them. And those are two that we've been added. Our real focus this year was on the implementation of at least 1 to 2 interdisciplinary courses. That's been something we've been talking about for years and has been a recommendation through our NEASC reviews. So that was kind of we need to do that. We know that it's good for kids. We know that it's engaging. We know that it provides authentic opportunities for learning. And then the teachers developed a syllabi, scope, and sequence of new courses and selected required materials during the spring and summer for implementation in the fall. So that's how new courses are put together. Our graduation requirements follow the Mass Guidelines for College and Career Readiness, which was adopted in 2007 and then amended in 2018. In 2018, it was updated to require a 4-year math requirement, which was a 3-year math requirement prior to that. So we've added that 4th year on in around 2018. And around 2015, we made a change to our science. These are the big changes that have happened in the last 10 years. To our science program, we used to have a introduction to physics, which is not, it was confusing because people thought it meant that you already took physics, but it really wasn't like real physics. It was this introductory long course. And what would happen is our kids would take biology in sophomore year and then take the MCAS for biology, English, and math all in sophomore year. And what we determined is that we would have a better pathway in our sciences for more rigorous and engaging science programs if we removed that introductory to physics course and put biology freshman year along with the MCAS for that year. So those have been the big changes. So what is it that you voted on? Any changes to graduation requirements, which we are proposing one tonight. As you can see, we've only proposed 2 or 3 in the past. And the school committee vote on the course of studies is a vote to ensure alignment with district policy, finances, and strategic objectives. So that's what your vote is for. I always, in every presentation I give to with my faculty and also with you guys and anyone else that will listen to me, is our definition or what we believe student-centered learning is. And I think this is important in terms of what we're proposing tonight for new courses. So it's really the distinct needs, interests, aspirations, cultural backgrounds of students, giving student opportunities for choice in their learning and design their learning experience, and connecting learning to real world issues, problems, and applications. And we'll see that in the civics action program class. So how we got to the stuff that's being presented tonight, I think is important. So this year we've been having professional development working groups. So what we've done is we've put groups of teachers from different departments into groups. They're led by a department chair, and they've been assigned to a task of things that we found over the last 2 years were things we wanted to do to make student learning more engaging, move it forward in terms of being more student-centered. So we took the information from NEASC and other things that we knew. We kind of brainstormed it all together, and then we tried to find the things that were realistic, and we identified those. So then this year we said, okay, we know what's realistic. Let's get working groups on here to get this work done and move it forward. So I'm going to go through each of the working groups here. So the first two working groups, you can jump ahead 1 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah, were around portfolios. And, you know, this is something that schools kind of, you get like, what's the best way to do that? So we've been playing around with different options, like should it be embedded during U-Block? Should it be a standalone course? Should it be something that's done in each individual courses? And many teachers have very different opinions about how you do that. So you'll see one proposal today to help us. Our school improvement plan says we should be piloting this with grade 9 next year. And that's part of our proposal this year. Portfolio 1 group actually developed a rubric on how to assess the vision of the graduate in work. They created reflection guides for students, and they developed initial expectations about what should be the depth of the portfolio. So they came to agreement on that and have a written proposal on that. Portfolio 2 group, they looked at protocols for review of student work so that we can calibrate our understanding about what is meeting a standard or what is not meeting a standard. And that protocol is to be used by both teachers, students to student, and teacher to teacher or teacher to student. And the tuning protocol, it's like helps you to look at reviewing, evaluating, and selecting work to put in your portfolio as well. What is your best representation of meeting that standard? The report card comment group, you'd have to understand our report card comments that were in Aspen, there were well over 100 comments available. Things from a pleasure to have in class to self-absorbed in class. That was the range. And yes, a teacher wants you self-absorbed in class on a report card. So there were actually others that were pretty inappropriate, to be honest. And it was time for review. Teachers had actually stopped using them because they found that they were not very useful in terms of communicating student progress. And that in itself is a problem, and that we're not communicating enough information to families. So this group reviewed the report card comments in relation to the vision of the graduate. We also had a conversation with our school council at the beginning of the year because members of this group were also on my school council and were able to bridge that gap. And there were parents on that group that said, well, we want the hard truth comments as well. And so we were kind of trying to balance those two pieces of advice. And so the comments that were developed were reviewed first by the department chairs and the crew that made them, and then by the entire faculty. We plan to introduce the comments in the spring of 2023, but we plan to do it in a way that we're also highlighting and promoting the vision of the graduate and where we're going forward. We need to do a bunch of coding changes in Aspen, so that's why it won't go till next year. And then we'll implement in the start of the school year, and then we'll continue to review the comments to see if they're the most appropriate in terms of communicating.
Can I just clarify? You said next year, but spring of 2023 is coming up in a couple months.
We're gonna introduce the comments. So, and then we're actually going to implement them next school year and then review them mid-year next year.
I misinterpreted that. Thank you.
No problem. We had an interdisciplinary course group that they had a lot of fun. Their goal was to actually try to find some courses that would be able to do that they could articulate how it met the vision of the graduate, also staffing and budgetary implications. These are the course titles that they came up with: Once Upon a Crime, which we're going to hear about tonight; green business, living in a material world. So they were going to marry kind of green schools along with business and come up with like products that they would develop. Cranberry Summer, which is a course about Cape Ann and about the different like fishing and all the different industries on Cape Ann. And then Revolutions and Rebels in Latin America was proposed as a course that would be a history and Spanish teacher and would be taught solely in Spanish. That could be coming up in the future. Didn't get voted for this year. We have a SCORE working group, knowing that we needed to do some work there. They've come up with a 4-year plan for SCORE in terms of how that should kind of progress from grade 9 to grade 12. We see that integrating very well with the portfolio in terms of in 9th grade, talking about personality and career assessments and how do you set a goal, to in 10th grade, really looking at careers and researching deeper, again, forwarding with goals. 11th grade, really learning how to present yourself in a professional atmosphere, either through your resume, cover letter writer, even how to write a email to a teacher. You don't start with, yo, Mrs. P, I don't like the schedule for tomorrow. Like, we got those. And so it'd be more, you know, just kind of upping that game a little bit. And then in grade 12, actually the implementation of SCORE, tied to, again, the vision of the graduate and the students explicitly presenting how they've achieved those skills and dispositions. Things that we're going to change and bring back are bringing back faculty advisors with weekly prompts and updates that actually are tied, like how are you meeting this aspect of the vision of the graduate during it. A graded research paper that also will have prompts tied specifically to the vision of the graduate. And then the senior intern, the supervisor evaluation will also have questions for the evaluator tied to the vision of the graduate. So we're trying to bring this string all the way through. It will not be perfect next year. I'm going to tell you that. It's like we got to start somewhere and we just got to keep building it and improving where we see fit. So this is the first course that is a proposal, and this is a civic action proposal. So a civic action project is required by law for all students at some time in middle school and then again at some time in high school. And in the middle school, they do their project in grade 8. They also have a plan to implement portfolios starting in the middle school that will marry up to the high school. So we felt as though putting our civil action project in grade 9 provides for kind of some continuity in instruction and thought. We are looking, so the new advantages are that it meets all of the attributes of student-centered learning. It provides for an authentic introduction to the vision of the graduate skills and dispositions, which at some point kids are going to come to us with, but right now we're introducing, and allows for the introduction of the portfolio concept to students as they can post and reflect on each aspect of the project. So they're going to need to consider an individual topic that they're interested in researching and trying to change in society. And from there, they will research the topic using embedded media literacy skills that will benefit them through their 4 years of high school. They will create an action plan, implement them, complete a final project, showcase them, and then reflect on their development of the skills and dispositions. They may partner with local communities, state, federal, or global agencies to achieve their goal. So it'll be completely student run. It's their interest.
Can I ask a clarification, or you want to?
I'd like to let her get through the whole presentation and then we'll go through.
It's going to go fast from here. That's the biggest one. So one course we won't be running anymore is Democracy in the Digital Age, because many of those skills would be embedded in this course. Again, community partners will be based on student choice. One thing that this will impact is during freshman year, students will have one less semester elective available if it is approved as a graduation requirement. And our current staffing allows for this program implementation. It would require about 0.25 staff because it's a semester course, so 5 semester sections, which is 2.5 courses. From the student choice courses, students voted for video and graphic design to be reinstated. It's a course that we had actually moved away from because of the high interest in AP photo, and we put those topics into Photo 1. What we found is we're not going deep enough in Photo 1 with what students want for video and graphic design, so we'd like to pull it back out. The impact will be one less semester-long course of either Photo 1 or Photo 2. I think currently we have 5 sections of Photo 1 and 3 sections of Photo 2, so there's room there to do that. Once Upon a Crime is like the best. If you talk to the teachers that created this, you at all times you need to make the sound from Law and Order prior to speaking about it and at the end of speaking about it. And so basically what they're proposing is an English and a science teacher working together. It would be a semester-long course, but it would actually be 2 sections. So 1 quarter the kids would be with the science teacher, 1 quarter they would be with the English teacher, and then they would flip-flop. They'd learn things about DNA, fingerprinting, blood splatter, all those things, while also on the English side, reading different literature related to crime and like figuring it all out, and also the law. And then at the end, they will bring the 2 sections together to do a mock trial based on a scenario that the teachers plan to create and determine were they guilty or were they not.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. We have a new business teacher this year, and he has just such a cool background that he brings to us. And so he's like, you know, I really would love to teach economics or sports and entertainment marketing. So to understand how we would fit this in is with our prior business teacher, depending on how our sections fall, we used to move 1 section either to him from math, or we would put that section back with math and add an extra section of business, depending on what students we're looking for. So we have the ability to continue to do that in order to allow for these 2 semester courses to fit in. And as Diego was saying, our DECA program is just booming right now, and it's all because kids are really interested in understanding business, economics, marketing much more deeply. And so this is what was being proposed. I know there was a question about teaching accounting, which actually is very cool because I took accounting in high school and I thought it was awesome. I was really good at it. But we do teach aspects of accounting in our quantitative reasoning class, but not all students end up there in the math program. So it is something to think about moving forward. All right, so then our physics change, this one probably caused the most, and I need to explain how we got here. So we have physics, that was in usually you take it in grade 11 or 12, just physics, right? College prep or honors. Then 2 or 3 years ago, we added AP Physics 1 to our course of selection. And we've always had AP Physics C, which is taken concurrently with calculus. It's a calculus-based physics. So this year, a different teacher took over teaching AP Physics 1, new eyes on the course. At the same time, it was just like things happened. The teacher of AP Physics C went out on an 8-week parental leave. So the teacher who teaches AP Physics 1 this year taught AP Physics C. And as he was going through it, he's like, these two classes are exactly the same thing. He's like, this is such a waste of time. They're learning the same thing 2 times over. He said, what they're missing is learning about electricity and wavelengths as opposed to mechanical physics. So he said, what you would be better doing is keeping the standard physics, moving the physics to physics 2 AP, and keeping AP physics C. So the real physics kid could take 3 years of physics, or you could take physics in grade 10, 11, and 12, and then jump to physics 2 AP, or take physics in 10, 11, and 12, or jump to physics C, AP physics C, not needing to take physics 2. So it provides for a lot of opportunity. The other exciting piece about this, and I know like people were concerned about how the pathways went in the pictures. I actually had purposely taken out the lines in science because what happens is a student doesn't have to double up in science sophomore year, but if they're a true science kid, they can double up in science in sophomore year. And that would be taking chemistry and physics, or maybe taking chemistry and AP bio because they've already taken bio, and then they can create their own pathways. So if you're a physics kid, you might take a physics pathway. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to be a doctor someday, well, you might go with the bio, human anatomy, AP chemistry kind of route. So there's no one pathway. You can kind of move throughout all of those courses based on what's going to be best for what you're interested in and what your post-secondary plan is. That's the end, I think, right? Yeah.
Well, you've been busy.
We
At the
have,
high
I
school.
mean, I'm gonna be honest, like, I was really excited. I'll be honest. I was really excited about presenting this tonight because it's kind of the end of a lot of year. I mean, it's not the end because we have so much more to do and we have to implement and then start changing and redoing it. But we've been talking about this for so long and now we're finally getting to play with some of it and do it. And it's not going to be perfect. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's going to be close to perfect because we're good, but we're going to have to, move it around as we go. And I don't know that we've fully figured out the portfolio piece, but we need to start somewhere to see what is possible. Teachers need to start to see things in action and then move from that. Otherwise, they're very skeptical and they won't take the kind of chance on it. Sure.
Well, thank you. So yeah, that I can get your enthusiasm and I feed off that too. So that's wonderful.
Fun.
Thank you. And thank you for being really clear at the beginning about, where this came from, giving us the background there, what it is we're voting on, what we're doing here as part of this as well. So that's very helpful for all of us. So maybe what we can do then is go through, entertain a motion, and then ask questions in discussion for the public. We've had a chance, of course, to send in questions, but there may be a few clarifying questions as
Sure.
well.
Happy.
So is this before we make a motion?
Yes, because I think it influences how we make the motion.
Okay.
Graduation requirements are a policy.
Mhm.
Don't we have to do a first and second read of policies?
Is there anything in this that is in conflict with our graduation policy?
Well, given that we haven't changed that policy since the inception of the policy manual, I don't think there's anything that prevents us from voting to go forward tonight.
Okay.
And we can go back and amend the policy
But we're adding a graduation requirement here.
yeah, and we've added them in the past through this process, so we've just been blind. We haven't been going back to the policy manual to double check against this. So
Yeah,
this
but
has been,
that's not the question I'm asking.
Hold on, let's let her finish her sentence before we interrupt.
Okay.
Go ahead.
we've been following this process for making changes to graduation requirements and course requirements for the past 13 years.
Mhm.
So I don't see a problem in voting the changes tonight and letting them take effect and doing any policy manual amendments, updates, or changes as a secondary measure.
So would you say, or actually go ahead because you were saying something.
The purpose for having a first and second read of a policy is so that everybody, including the public, has a chance to weigh in on it. Graduation requirements are a pretty big deal. Why wouldn't we provide that opportunity?
So I guess my question is, so Are you suggesting we're already not in alignment with the graduation requirements policy?
Correct.
Currently. So if we're already outside of alignment, this is highlighting that clearly. What you're suggesting is that it would be okay for us to move forward with this. Now that we know that, we can go back and look at
I'm
that.
saying I would be comfortable with, and we have acted upon the votes of this group on the program of studies changes when graduation requirements have been changed within. 2018 is an example of that.
Okay.
So if this group is comfortable acting in that way, there's nothing that prevents them going forward.
Okay.
I
And
mean,
just to
it's up
clarify,
to the will of this group.
Right.
If you want to back out and start to, and put it through policy change first, then that is also the will of this group.
okay, so, and then one other question. So the graduation, can you clarify one more time, what exactly are the changes to the graduation requirement that are
Put the
involved
lights
here?
on so we can
It's
see
the
it.
addition of
Is
one
it the civics?
semester course in grade 9. It's the civic actions project course, which would have the required law of the civic actions program.
Right.
And it would also help us to springboard the use of the portfolio program, to start working with that and see how to best utilize it. If we don't vote for that tonight, that is fine, but it will not be a graduation requirement for next year. We'll have to wait another year, because I will be meeting with the grade 8 parents and students on the 26th.
Yeah.
And I can't change a graduation requirement after that time. So either way is fine with me, but I just want you to understand that it will delay us a year in terms of moving that ball forward.
And I just want to clarify then, so that the only graduation requirement change is a change based on requirement by mass, like a state requirement.
So the project is a state requirement.
Yep.
Which currently we have kind of stuck in US History 2. It's really not done. I mean, it's at the end of the year and we end up not teaching
Mhm.
21st century history of the United States, which is a lot of really important topics in that time
Mm-hmm.
period. So we're looking to put it as a separate standalone course.
Any other clarifying questions specifically on this, but we can discuss it after, but just a clarifying questions. Yes.
Can we just know what the policy says right now, so we know how different and how? what
Where we
we're
already
talking
are.
about?
Yep.
Yeah, I've got it here. If you want me to read it.
I guess would we negate the ones in the program studies if it doesn't match?
Yeah.
Because like that's gonna say 3 years of
Yeah.
math and it's not gonna include world language and those are part of our graduation requirements. So
So here's what our school committee policy currently says, which, by the way, it's IKF, graduation requirements.
Mhm.
I'll just read the list of courses. The 110 credits and 40 hours of community service stays the same. Course requirements are the following: 4 years of English, 3 years of social studies, 1 year must be US history, 3 years of science, 3 years of mathematics, 1 year of physical education and health education. That's it.
And so we're already,
Come on.
right, which happens from time to time. We know there are some policies that have not been updated over time.
And this is,
Why
It
this
seems to me
comes
like
to-
this is more of a policy issue than it is a graduation requirement issue. I think that we should be addressing the graduation requirements, and that the policy should be brought into line by the policy subcommittee. I'm in favor of that as well.
I am as well.
I totally think that's what we need to do. I'm asking specifically about our process here tonight about the new graduation requirements. Things that school committee has already voted on, I completely agree.
I think that's what we were just saying is that
Yeah.
is the opinion of let's treat this, knowing that we're already out of compliance, treat this tonight as graduation requirements, as has been standard practice for some time, and then let the policy subcommittee address the inconsistency that's already existing and that will continue to be.
Well, the way we address it is come back and vote
Yeah.
an updated school committee policy.
Great. Yeah, I think we're all
With
in
a first and
agreement that we
second
will
reading.
need to do that. Yes, absolutely.
I don't know that you two are saying the same thing.
We're
right
not,
now.
we're not saying the same thing.
You're
No.
both nodding, but I think it's a different
Yeah.
point.
I understand the process for updating. I also think that we're saying that since it's already out of, or I will only speak for myself. We're already out of compliance. We recognize that the policy needs to be updated. given that there is historical standard practice by the school committee to update graduation requirements that did not go back and then deal with the policy, I am comfortable continuing to do that with the expectation right now that then the policy subcommittee undertake that to reflect it.
Okay, so could we then take a vote to deviate from our policy
Yes.
adoption standard, right? So we're all clear that we are deviating from our policy process
Mhm.
in order to take a vote on this proposal.
I think we can do that. In fact, I have the policy adoption thing here, so. Amendments. We may dispense with the above sequence to meet emergency conditions. I'm not sure that it's an emergency, but it is a time-sensitive
I
issue.
think that it would be a disservice to our incoming freshmen to delay this for a policy wording issue.
So we can vote to do that.
You could vote to do that. You could also accept that past practice has been that the program of studies and the changes presented within have driven the evolution of the process. You could go either way.
I want to make a point of clarification to make sure I'm understanding this. I think we've all accepted that we haven't followed this practice for many years. I think Jake's point, Jake, if I'm getting you right, is not so much about what we haven't done in the past, but that with respect to a change tonight in a graduation policy, tonight's change to a policy would typically be allowed a second read. And so
That's what I need a point of clarification on. Typically, an amendment goes through once.
So this,
And
I don't
not
know. I
a
just think
second
this
read.
is what Jake was
So I
saying.
just I'll need to go back and do some research and kind of get what the proper protocol
You're
is
right.
to put together.
Amendments to the policy at the action stage will not require repetition of the sequence. That's
So
okay.
there's a little work to do.
Right.
Right? I think there's also, not to go down a rabbit hole right now,
Mhm.
two directions you could go with policy amendment. There are policies out there that basically give authority to this process to drive the changes and don't enumerate what the graduation requirements are.
Right.
Then there are policies that enumerate the graduation requirements.
Mhm.
So I think you could make a decision which direction you want to go there.
Yeah.
So it's operationally, this is the process by which the committee has voted on and given its approval for changes to be made. So there's a record of approvals given. If you want to go back and tie it in the future to, I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to start with a district level policy.
Mhm.
I think this is the proper channel by which the recommendation should come forward and then amendments get
Mhm.
made in alignment, or we change language to allow for flexibility, but
I
that's up
guess-
to this group.
I guess my question for the committee right now is then if we know we want to at least entertain this and take a vote on it, that sort of thing, do we wish to then take an official vote about the process, like the policy of policy adoption, like you're saying, to officially put on paper that we are choosing to dispense with this, given this
I think
emergency
we should do that
condition?
just so we have that on the record and then take the vote on the graduation requirement.
So that's what the alternative would be to move forward with this as an established past practice. So any other input on that? Is there any reason we shouldn't? Okay, all right, then, you say you have a question?
That's a condition.
Oh, same thing. All right, then Jake, would you like to make that motion?
Yes. Oh, you want to say?
Yeah.
So I'm making a motion to dispense with the typical two-read policy adoption process in order to just make an amendment with one vote tonight.
I will second that. Chris will second that. Any further discussion?
Yes, I have a question. I
Okay.
thought that amendments only required one read.
It's a little iffy. Well, because it says amendments to the policy at the action stage, meaning like when if tonight we wanted to amend, when we did want to amend on the second read, you don't have to go back to the beginning and redo the thing. That's how I read that. But either way, we do still have this other clause that allows for this.
Yeah, well, let me just say, I think our authority to establish graduation requirements is one of the most fundamental roles of a school committee. And it is one of the most impactful things we do to students and community. And therefore we should be, even if we just consider it an amendment, we should be giving the public the opportunity to weigh in on any graduation requirements we put forth. That's why I think it's so important. I understand the timeliness of this for tonight, and which is why I think this motion makes sense. But it is like one of the most core things the school committee does.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a motion and a second. All in favor?
Right.
That's unanimous. Okay. So that being the case, any further questions on,
Yeah.
oh, we
again-
haven't even made the motion
No,
itself.
but again, about how we make the motion. So now, can we separate the motion for the graduation requirement from the program of studies?
I would not suggest that. I think we need to let this be a thing that has been presented, move forward. That's why we just made the option to do this.
So what's the reason of you?
The reason is, again, because it's so important that the graduation requirement be explicit that we are supporting that, right? That we be clear about that vote. And then everything else that comes along with the program of studies, we can take a vote about supporting that.
Well, then let's let the vote happen. And if that's a problem and it comes out unfavorably, someone could move to reconsider if we wish to. But I think we just went through that whole process for this, knowing this is a timely thing for tonight. So let's at least start with what has typically been a pretty procedural kind of thing. So I will move that we accept the proposed program of studies and change, do I have to say
You
and
could note
changes?
And
And
recommended graduation.
recommended
requirements.
graduation requirement changes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion?
I really enjoyed that presentation. Thank you.
Likewise.
I'm excited for my kids to get to high school.
Thank you.
And mine's in that tester class. We've got tester class.
Yeah.
Coming up.
I think you might
We're
have
real
to
excited.
abstain
Yeah,
from
it
the
is.
vote.
No, I cannot, I cannot.
Are we at some point gonna have an opportunity to ask questions?
This is now,
About the,
because it may, if
Are
it
we
may
on-
influence
you
your
know, it
vote.
has nothing to do with the graduation requirements, and if we just need to have the vote, we can have the vote, but I just had a couple of, questions in general. about
No, I think that this is the time for that. Yes, the idea was to get into the discuss, so we've had a motion and a second, now we're in discussion, so yes, please.
Okay, sure.
The voice hilarious.
Okay, Trish, thank you so much. That was really interesting, and I've read the program of studies numerous times, but this was the first time I actually really enjoyed it and took my time with it, so. I have two questions, and the first is really quick. It's, so I'm gonna say them both at once. The first is there a class or a program that you wanted to include, but you didn't have the resources to do so?
Great.
And the second is, there's some different times in the program set of studies where it comes up obviously with the science pathways, but also I noticed a section in the mathematics that suggested that students review the mathematics requirements for their college of choice before their junior year. And this struck me because I have a senior right now who we are in January, who the college of his choice remains a big question mark. So I thought to myself, wait, we're telling sophomores that they should be thinking about the college of their choice in order to decide their mathematics pathway. And I'm not nitpicking the language by any means, but I would like to hear a little bit more about how, what type of guidance we give students in helping them. It's one thing for us to sit here and look at all these pathways. I suspect that the way my students chose classes was turn to the kid next to them and say, hey, what are you taking for your elective? So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how the school incorporates guidance into this process, because there's some big
100%.
choices.
So the guidance council, the guidance staff meet with each grade level at least one time a year. So they meet with grade 9 in September, grade 11 in November, grade 10 in early February. They're meeting with grade 12 students constantly through the college process. And they have different themes. So for grade 9, it's like self-reflection and that idea of finding your interests, which we're also going to kind of put all with our portfolio projects. And then grade 10 is more career interests, and they do the little quiz that says you should be a farmer or you should be a business person. Didn't somebody in here, you were a farmer? Right?
I was
Somebody-
not.
1 year, somebody said, oh, I was a farmer. And grade 11 really starts being post-secondary planning. During the month of March, when we're doing the course selection project, process. The guidance counselors go into classes and actually talk to the groups of like the English, they go into English classes, let's say, and talk to the kids about how to select their courses. It would be my hope that teachers, when they're doing their recommendations, are talking to the kids about why they should go to this class next. I think we could do a better job there, to be honest. And we also want students kind of thinking, I think it gets tricky. Like we put in the program of studies, well, you want to go to UMass, this is what you need to do. You want to go to a physics, you want to be an engineer, these are the types of courses you need to have. And it's really on the guidance counselor to be having the conversations with students about that. I think sometimes there are students who are in the guidance office all the time because they're all like focused on that. And I think we could do better outreach for some of the students who aren't as like eager for the post-secondary world.
Thank
But
you.
that's
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Did you answer your first question?
No,
Val?
and the
Oh,
first,
what was
That was the best one.
the first question was there a course or a program that you
Yeah.
felt like?
I thought the Rebels in South America, like just having a class taught fully in Spanish would be very cool. And so, I mean, we talked about all of them, like that group, to go in their working group was just so much fun because they came up with some outlandish classes that I was like, really, we're gonna learn about, who's the Miss Congeniality, who's that?
Sandra Bullock?
Sandra, yeah, they had a course based on Sandra Bullock. There was depth to it, but I was like, no. But they were really gung ho. I'm really glad that the kids liked the idea of the Once Upon a Crime class because I think that has a ton of potential to it on so many aspects. I think local history is important and having kids learn about Cape Ann would have been a cool class.
And so why
I think
can't
it's
you pursue the other two?
what?
Why are you unable to also pursue Cranberry Summer?
I think it's a lot of work in terms of developing the curriculum. And so teachers are going to be building those classes over the summer. And there's some teachers that are very comfortable with doing that and creating their curriculum, whereas that's a daunting task to other teachers. And I also think we wanted to take some little bites because we have a lot going on right now. I was hopeful when we started the year. I'm like, I want 3 interdisciplinary classes, go find them, let's do it. And, you know, at the end of the day, we proposed them to the kids and they voted for Once Upon a Crime, and then they also voted for graphic design, which wasn't necessarily a fully like 2 teacher. But you know what, that's what they wanted. And I think it was an opportunity for student voice. And I'd like to see us do more of that type of surveying of students because I think they were really excited about getting them to choose.
So can I ask just 2 clarifying follow-ups? So student voice determine the classes. You have the resources to do what you want to do or don't?
Yes, I do.
And then on the college prep, you don't need to know what college you're going to, but you might want to start working with a type of college.
Right,
You
or
want to
type
do.
of, if I want to be a
program.
nurse,
Okay.
then I really need to be focused on what classes I'm taking. If I want to be an engineer,
Okay.
I should be focused on. If I want to go to college in California, I need to know that I need to take an arts class because they have a requirement at the state, you know.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, Jake, ask your
All right,
questions.
I've-
No,
I've
go ahead,
actually
Jake.
talked a lot already, so.
I'm inviting
Okay.
you to ask your
Anna
questions, Jake,
Schwartz, she's
please.
gonna go first.
As chair, I am asking you to ask your
Okay, all
questions,
right. Well, I've
please.
got a number
Thank
of
you.
questions.
I know.
So first of all, thank you. You all have done a lot of work and it very much is in line with where the strategic plan and everything that we pushed in the district improvement plan and whatnot. So thank you for all that and keeping that moving forward. Particularly the interdisciplinary course, I'd love to take that myself. And being student-centered and engaging, while being realistic. So I appreciate all that. Also, the experiments with portfolios, getting that started, I very much understand that process and what it takes to get it rolling. So thank you. So my questions are mostly around the graduation requirement.
Sure.
So the course seems to mostly be about media literacy
I think,
as written with the project combined. I understand you need media literacy to do the project, But how is this a civics course or a civics project? How is it tied to civics and
So it's about
beyond the
their,
media literacy?
so their project is about creating change in society, taking some civic action. So it may be that I'm going to take a very simple test, that they want to work in the town of Manchester. I think this has actually already happened in Manchester, to remove plastic bags from stores. So they're going to need to create some partnerships with different boards, Board of Selectmen that would vote on that. They're going to need to do their research to determine, why is it we want to get rid of plastic bags? Why is it bad for the environment? What is the alternative? What do you replace it with? What is the cost of that to the different stores? They're going to have that. And then they're actually going to try to move that ball forward, present it maybe to the Board of Selectmen. And so it's actually engaging in the process of civic action.
I love all that. That's not the question I'm asking.
Oh, okay.
The question I'm asking is, especially since they've just done a project in 8th grade,
Mhm.
how is this advancing social studies knowledge and skills, right? What are they learning that they're applying to this project, in
So
the
they need
content
to
area?
research the background of each of these things. So they have to find the topic that is of interest to them, which that in itself would be pretty daunting, I think, for ninth grader, to tell you the truth. And then they're going to need to dive in deep with different types of sources. So that's where the digital literacy comes in. The teachers are going to be working with kids on finding credible sources, what's credible, what's not. How do you, particularly if you're looking for statistics, how are you going to take those statistics apart to make sure that they're actually valid and that it's not just some random numbers, you can make the numbers say anything. So that's where that will come in.
Okay. It feels a little disjointed to me, at least as it's written up, and especially since they just did the 8th grade project, it doesn't feel like they've had a chance to develop much more before they're now doing their second civics project. So my second question. Is this in addition to their typical 9th grade course?
Yes.
And it's a replacement for democracy and digital age, is that what you said?
Democracy and digital age is elective in the social studies department that we just will not be running.
So how then do 9th graders fit this into their schedule?
So they'll take one less elective. So when you have a freshman course, there's 7 blocks in the day. And so they have 5 core courses. They have gym, civics, and then 2 other semester-based
All
electives.
right, so they lose one of those electives.
Yeah.
Okay. And what is the impact of delaying the graduation requirement by a year? I love the idea of running this course. I'll be honest, I'm leery that running the course for the first time when we're trying to build a civics project new for the first time and
We have the foundation of the civics
in the
project, so we've been
portfolio
doing
piece
it.
for the first time.
Yeah. So we have the civics project already built because we've been doing that since 2018 within US History 2 in junior year.
You have.
Yeah. So at the end of the school year, it ends up not being as robust and meaningful as we'd like it to be because of when it's placed and because it's detracting for other topics in United States History 2. So that's why we wanted to pull it out as a standalone to make it more robust. We saw just opportunities to make the connections to the work that we're already doing. And we selected 9th grade because it does lend itself to the introduction of the development of the portfolio based on the vision of the graduate to springboard those kids forward through grade 12. So, and as the middle school begins to work with portfolios, it's going to kind of marry over to the high school. And I'm not saying that we might look to adjust that in the future to make it a grade 9 or grade 10 course if the middle school is fully up and running with their portfolio. But right now, we're trying to find ways to add, use what we have to push the ball forward with the portfolios and the civic actions.
So what would be the impact of a delay by a year?
We would probably run the course. It would be an elective. And not all students then would be introduced to actually, all students would have to do a civic actions project, so actually we'd have to keep that in soft junior year, and we probably just wouldn't run the course for another year, and we wouldn't move forward with portfolios.
And if we do put this in as a graduation requirement and a ninth grader does not successfully complete their civics project, do they have to retake the course? What's the option?
What we do with students that don't, so there are students who don't successfully complete grade 9 English or geometry or algebra, and depending on what was impacting that student's ability to be successful, we either recommend alternate routes to complete that work. Maybe it's some work over the summer school or summer projects. Maybe it's working with somebody the following school year. It would not be retaking the exact same course. We don't recommend that generally.
And then I think my last question has to do with report card comments. Are those part of the program of studies?
No,
Okay.
that was submitted just informationally.
Okay. I think you probably got my comments from Pam, but it feels to me like those still need quite a bit of crafting. Are you planning to make edits to those as they get introduced based on feedback?
After they are implemented in the fall, we'll do a review mid-year. Those have been reviewed by not just the group. We've talked to school council and our complete faculty, but certainly as we move forward, if we find that they're not achieving the goals we hope to achieve, we will make adjustments. Right now, we're responding to the fact that we don't give any feedback on the report cards, and that's terrible.
So just so everybody knows, my main comment or reflection on the report card comments is that the vision of the graduate is meant to be an outcome at the end of high school. And right now, the proposed comments don't do much in terms of helping a student understand the progression towards those vision of a
I
graduate.
think what we need to see going forward, though, is as we implement the portfolio and projects from different classes are added to the portfolio that are specifically tied to the vision of the graduate, then you're going to see those tied together in terms of the report card. But I think it's going to take some progression.
Good.
The
I'm glad
comments
you're
are
gonna work
a
on that.
heck of a lot better than
Yeah.
what exists
Yes.
today. So
Yeah.
I will say they are
Yeah.
a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Great,
We're
thank you.
moving forward, little baby steps, but we're getting there.
And would it be fair to say that report card comments are generalized comments provided to the parent quarterly, and it's not the direct feedback to the student to guide their improvement and growth in meeting the standard?
Right, that would be in the portfolio. We're hoping parents will also have access to the portfolio once we finalize that platform. But yeah, they are better. Like currently, if anyone's going to use a comment, it's a pleasure to have in class. That has, you could, like you see a report card and the kid has a D-, but the comment is a pleasure to have in class because the kid's a really nice kid, so they're not meaningful in terms of providing information to students, to parents.
I thought my kid was the only kid who was a pleasure to have in class.
Right. It's comment
That was
32.
custom
You go 32, control D. That's a teacher thing.
Are the comments customizable at all?
So that's something we are going to look, because there is one comment we want to, but we need Ian to do that for us. It's not easy.
Got it. Anna, you had a question.
Oh, I think I read it somewhere, I could be wrong. For the language, right now there's only Spanish and French. And then I think you mentioned that if there is a interest for other language, it could be taken online pending budget. So what's the process for that?
So students need to take 2 years of language, either Spanish or French, at the high school. There are students, particularly students who maybe come from Brookwood and have had Mandarin in the past. Or actually, I just signed a form for a student to take Mandarin second semester. We offer German, there's German, Latin, and Mandarin through EduSare, and based on the number of students, we pay for those courses if a student is looking for them. If a student is looking for, like the one I did today was a far more extensive course that would much more expensive than we have the budget for. The student selected to pay that on their own.
In their regular schedule.
Yeah, they would do it as an independent study.
Great.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. We have a lot of students, American Sign Language is one students have done, German students have done, Mandarin. So yeah, that's been an option.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions, particularly that might relate directly to the reasons for the vote? Okay, so we've had a motion, a second, we've had considerable discussion. So at this point, we will move the vote. All in favor of approving the motion as stated previously? All in favor? That's unanimous.
Great.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate your support and I also appreciate your questions. They always push my forward thinking, so I'm very much appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You will
Awesome.
need to
Thank you
stretch
very
for
much.
half a moment.
Candy.
Yeah, the candy,
Stop
that's a
it.
lot of work. You
She's
guys have
so
been very
little.
busy. Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun, actually.
It sounds,
You're gonna need
I'm
it.
excited. I'm
Yeah,
coming
sure.
into this.
I know, that's
Yeah.
what, now we got to execute,
Yeah.
but I think we're on the right path.
Great.
Thank
I'm
you.
coming to Once Upon a Crime.
You're gonna have
I
trouble.
don't care what my kids say.
They're taking
You're
it.
gonna have
Maybe we can
trouble.
offer it on a fee base in the evening for
Yeah,
adults.
for the adults.
Yeah.
There's some revenue source.
Yeah.
All right,
Are we ready?
I think we're ready. Shall we? Shall we jump into budget?
We can jump into budget.
You can jump into budget. Budget workshop. Avi and Pam.
Okay.
It's all you.
Trying to think of what order we put it in.
Mhm.
Let me just pull my notes up for a second here. I think we said we would do review of the draft budget, then enrollment, and then some multi-year planning discussion.
Mhm.
Does it make sense while Trisha's here to do enrollment first? Do you think it matters what the order of operations is
It
really?
would be helpful if we have Tricia answer questions before,
I'd like that.
before 2 AM.
Yeah.
Otherwise she'll be sleeping here tonight.
Right.
So,
So let's dig into that. So for the budget workshop, we've got the three components. We're gonna go over the draft budget, which is provided to you with all of the detail behind it. Nothing has changed in terms of the bottom lines of the budget. Well, now what you're seeing is how it plays out in each school. So we know there's lots of different little questions that we can kind of go through. We did put together and have been working for, feels like months, on the enrollment review. Now, if I could find it, that'd be helpful.
Slide 139 of that. Page 139 of the packet.
Was it like 190 pages in the
200
end?
so.
Was it 200 and something?
200.
Folks at home, our packets were big this time around.
Are you looking for the enrollment stuff?
Yeah, I got it. I have
Okay.
the slides here.
I'm gonna dim the light slightly.
I got it.
We will
I
fall
wasn't trying to
asleep.
run to the
Yeah, I was
exit.
Yeah.
gonna say,
Maybe let's
Pleasant
Eat
candles.
more candy.
It's going.
Okay, so we get a lot of, let me tell you, I guess I'll preface this with, this is, probably won't be as comprehensive
Mhm.
as it, I don't even know if it could be comprehensive enough to answer all of the potential questions that could come up about enrollment, but we have given it our best effort. And the way we approached it was in two pieces, and we've added a couple of clarifying slides for when these get posted. But the initial piece is going to take you through what we use to drive any formal discussion about finances as they relate to the enrollment, because we have DESE-approved enrollment numbers, and then we have tried to answer some of the questions around kids exiting for private school, and those are less, let's call them less formal numbers. They're numbers that we have collected through opt-in process, generated by combining different data sets and creating some school age numbers. So we've kind of got two things going on right here, but we'll start with why it's important, right? So aside from the individual questions about how it impacts Essex, how it impacts Manchester, what's happening in the two schools, what's the impact going to be on my class size, three big driving factors on enrollment are its personnel and budget, right? The number of students we have determines enrollment and class size guidelines. What it doesn't do is it doesn't give us context on who our students are or what their needs are. So I would say a sub-bullet of driving personnel is that who the students are and what their profile is also has an impact, but as a raw input, the number of kids in the system is a general guideline for helping us determine our personnel budget. It's the basis for state aid. The DESE approved number is the basis for state aid. And the DESE approved number, as we'll repeat over and over again, is the number of students attending in person here in combination with students who are attending out of district. So it's resident enrollment plus school choice in plus out of district enrollment. However, DESE will report those numbers differently in different locations because the out of district number is extracted from our in-district enrollment when posted on the DESE profile. Okay, so when you go to the DESE profile, you're going to see in-house students plus school choice, but you're not going to see out of district. When you look at budgetary documents, you're going to see in residence here, school choice and OOD for budgeting purposes. Okay, and we also know finally that it's a key variable in the apportionment formula. And that's probably the reason in the way we've been tracking our enrollment data over time is really to inform how that apportionment formula rolls, how things are split out. So you'll see our data tracking over time tracks mostly just the balance between students attending from Manchester and Essex, as opposed to putting a lot of effort into tracking who's not attending. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So 3 key reasons why enrollment's important. We get an enrollment number from DESE, a certified enrollment number from DESE, the fall of every year. So the fall 22 October 1 report is what provides us with our certified number to go into budget season. And that's resident and school choice, and resident and school choice plus OOD. Okay. So our total enrollment's 1241. Our in-district enrollment, students who are attending here in these buildings, is 1221. And our straight resident number is 1158. If you take this and divide it between the 2 towns, you have 487 Essex residents and 671 Manchester residents for a total of 1,158 total resident students. Okay.
And just to be clear, that's total residents in the buildings here.
Correct.
These 3 buildings.
Yep.
This one is.
Yep. This is just a historical look at how enrollment tracks. This is pulled, every annual budget book has this chart in it with the particular year added in. So it shows you how the 3 different variables are working: the total enrollment, the Manchester enrollment, the Essex enrollment, and the school choice enrollment. This is just a snapshot. What struck me is that we've been aware that the bubble, which is, the peak up here in 13, 14, 15, I'm sorry, 12, 13, 14, that pre-peak, we were at a similar place to post-peak, right? So there was kind of the early years of regionalization tracked in total resident enrollment at about the same spot we find ourselves at now. But we know that there was a large spike in these interim years. And I think like between 11, 12, 13, we were talking about a 27% increase in enrollment. And now we're seeing that taper down. So historically, we're not that different now than when we started. And this is resident enrollment since inception. Again, you see kind of that bump in the coming down. This is the chart. I would say this is our most formal, and you jump in, Avi, please. This is our most formal document on enrollment. It's found in every budget. And this is what we use to track enrollment per class over time. It gives you a year by year, grade by grade, and also gives you the opportunity to track a cohort from beginning to end. And you do see shifts. Now, what this chart is showing you is shifts in students enrolled in school. So if you followed one class from kindergarten through senior year, you are going to see year to year an up or down movement in the total enrollment. But what this chart can't tell you is what happened. Did kids move in or move out? Did they elect to go to school choice out? How many school choice kids did we take in? You know, did the kids leave to go to private school? Did kids return from private school? So none of that information is underlying here. It's a pretty straightforward year to year with some totals of categories at the end and a track on the resident growth. But again, every chart is telling us the same thing. We started off about where we are now. We peaked in the 12, 13, 14 year, and now we're starting to come back down. So that's kind of the official enrollment on site, what's happening with our numbers. Any comments at this point, Avi?
No, I think nothing so far.
So what did we learn from this? When we started tying the two projects together, which was just giving a sense of what's happening with our resident enrollment and how it's impacting apportionment in our budget, we also were trying to answer the question that came up at I think last spring and then the beginning of the year, what's happening from 8th to 9th grade with kids electing to go to private school, right? So that's a subcategory question of enrollment. It's an important one. It's not the same impact as the 200 plus kids kind of matriculating out and not being replaced at lower grade level, but it is a factor. But in doing that, we were able to come up with this number that we're calling the school-aged population. I think our big caveat, red flag, warning horns, is that this is a number that we have backed into based on 2 data sets. In collecting the data for who is attending private school, that's done by an attending report projected every year. So we get lists of kids. I think I've talked about that before. So Ian's job over the past few months has been taking those lists and creating usable data sets from them. We've had a lot of meetings. We've gone through a lot of vetting of those numbers. He's done an excellent job. I don't know if you want to comment at all on his process.
Oh, I would just say that, you know, Ian Mankini, who works for us, she got an earned doctorate. He's kind of really upped our game on data reporting. I think there have been many different conversations over different topics where someone would say, hey, I saw a number on the website, didn't quite look right, or what's going on. And I think part of what he's enabled us to do, this is through a restructuring that we did about 2 years ago to bring this position on. Most districts have this position. They do all the state reporting, not only for students, which is the SIMS, but also for staffing, which is the EPIMS, and lots of other reporting that the ESU requires. He's become our Aspen guru. He's the person who helps us to really just analyze what's up, how to systematize process, how to make sure that you have good data going in so that you have good data coming out. And you know, he's only been here about 1.5 years. So there's a lot of work that he's been doing to kind of up our game. He's amazing. But this was a brand new assignment. And so it really required taking what was essentially a Word document over 10 years worth of Word documents where someone might have captured this opt-in information that we got from private schools, some of whom responded, some of whom didn't. From a year to year, you might not even have the same school respond necessarily, and try to build a data set from it. And that will allow us to kind of continue to do this going forward. So like everything, with a lot of the restructurings we've done, it's been an eye towards catching up, but also trying to build sustainable processes. So we're hopeful that this type of conversation we can have in future years, because they are a lot of questions that people ask. We want to be able to have a system. We just didn't have a system. So essentially we've had to build one from the ground up. And I know some people would say, this seems like a pretty simple thing to have at your fingertips. The data is there, but building it into numbers where we could check and say, well, hey, what about this? What about that? And then we would go back and say, well, we need to make sure that this is reported accurately here or there. So that was more verbose, but he's been a great asset to have. And the other thing is he runs all the reporting. So I think he really is very good at understanding the DESE requirements. And for that first bullet, the resident enrollment, it's completely apples to apples with every other district out there. It's really this private school piece where we're trying to bring meaningful data to you in a way where it's really unofficially gathered. And it's just, it has been tricky. I think we're going to be in better shape each year going forward.
So what we did to arrive at the school age number is take our resident enrollment number and just add to it the tally that we had for kids attending private school in a particular year. So I guess take it with a grain of salt, but I think we were able to put it together and make some general observations again, with the caveat that this is not necessarily the most scientific way to arrive at the head count per grade level in the 2 towns. At Jake's suggestion, we did inquire to the town on the census. They're gonna send us what they have. They don't have a historic look. They can produce, they can extrapolate an age report
Yes.
from year to year. What we don't know is what's the basis of that age report. Is it collected every year? So we're going to look at it, share it with Ian. And if Ian thinks there's something he can build off of that to help us project better in the future, we'll do what we can with it. But so it's just some of our observations, or that there is a general demographic decline in the number of available students to attend school in the two towns. So that's what's driving what we're talking about in the shift in apportionment, right? So we're looking at, when we were talking about the 27% increase a few years back, we talked about it in terms of the equivalent of Essex Elementary School. We grew that much in a short period of time. We are declining that much in a little bit of a slower rate, but our overall enrollment is following that pattern, and that's impacting how the apportionment is playing out. Because what we're seeing in the numbers is that it's quantifying what we've been generalizing, which is the Manchester enrollment decline rate. So resident students exiting and not replenishing at the kindergarten level is faster for Manchester than it is for Essex. I think one thing that we saw in the numbers that you'll see a little later on is that the private school enrollment is actually increased in Essex, not in Manchester. So that was something that we weren't expecting to see, just given kind of where the questions were coming from and what we thought we saw happening. But the Essex rate of access to private school has gone up considerably.
Is that last school 2012 and 2023? We just need to check that. I think that might be 2012 and 2023, but
Okay.
I will confirm that more.
So I think this right here is the budget apportionment answer, and this is just kind of a interesting fact underlying. So we're from the 35, I guess we went up 35% overall. We were tracking 27 when we talked a lot about it many years ago. Our decline has been at about 21% in student and resident enrollment. The resident enrollment is similar to pre-cert. I already mentioned that. And, kind of to oversimplify, we're graduating larger classes than we're bringing in. That's just what we're seeing in the enrollment numbers. And one other thing is, if you look at some of the earlier charts of total enrollment, I think it's fascinating, the number of school choice. I don't know how well you can see this slide, but the number of school choice students now versus when we began is considerably lower. You'll see that in the early years when we had similar resident enrollment, we were bringing in 120, 137, 149. We were, somewhere between 130 and 150 for school choice. Yeah. So when we're talking about some of the revenue streams, just an aside, if we're now working with a number of 60 students, you cut a revenue stream in half. And that had to be taken up by the towns, right? Because our whole program didn't shrink due to decreased school choice. We tapered off school choice because of fewer opportunities to put kids in while we were booming, and we just haven't fully replaced since we started to trend down. So
Can I ask a question about that?
Mhm.
So just with, your guys' historical aspect of this, since I don't have any historical aspect past 2 years, is there a reason why that trend occurred?
the school choice or the
School choice.
purposeful. When
So that
enrollment was
why.
increasing, there were fewer open seats available to give to school choice.
Yep.
But the years leading up to it, we were stacking school choice. So there was an
Gotcha, that makes
assessment
sense.
that we took in too many kids and left ourselves vulnerable to not being able to accommodate new resident students coming in,
That makes
which
sense, yeah.
forced the need to increase staff and support in
Gotcha.
the budget. So I think from there, the rule of thumb became you don't add school choice purely for revenue because you don't know when this next wave is coming, right? So as much as we model this out, I think what we know about enrollment is as a public school, you're subject to who's moving in and out of town, right? Again, with the whole private school conversation being a separate one within it, you know, if for some reason houses start selling like hotcakes and can people start moving in, whether we plan for them or not, we have to be prepared. So I think the school choice was a deliberate, I think we went 3 years with none, and then we just started the process of entering the number of school choice students that exited.
Got it.
But our school choice, number of the kids, the school choice, is percentage-wise actually higher, over the past 3 months, 3 years. So the school
That's
choice.
3 years maybe,
Yeah.
because we've added back in, but we weren't adding back in during those bubble classes, right? So,
Oh, we're talking about the previous years.
yeah, just talking about the whole trend.
Okay.
Well, I was asking.
Yeah, the reason it's higher in the past 3 years is because that's when we stopped shutting down the doors to school choice in general. So what we were doing when enrollment was going up, I think there were a lot of families saying, oh, there's more and more kids here and we want to make sure we have adequate space and focus on class size. So we just, as Pam said, we were graduating kids without replacing until that kind of stabilized. Once it did, we started to add them back. So if you just look at those years where we're adding them back, yes, of course, that percentage would go up.
Yeah,
If
and
you
the
look at the
total
whole
number's gonna
trend.
go down because of that bubble too.
Yeah,
because-
exactly. That's why if you look at the whole trend, I think you'll see.
And the other
More part.
year where we purposely didn't take in any school choice students was during the COVID period.
Right.
Because we just did, we had no
Needed
idea how would we
space.
be doing what we were doing.
Come on in, now, go.
Okay. So then the question of, did we get there yet? We're getting, question of private school attendance. So the report confirms what we all pretty much agreed on, but wanted to have the data and understand the data a little bit more to support, which is, it's not. We have seen an uptick in the past few years of 8 and 9 exiting higher than in previous years. This just gives you the historical grade by grade number of students, or percentage rather, of students who are utilizing private school as opposed to coming to public school. So I think what I've seen in this, and open to other points of view, is K-8 is fairly stable over time. 8 to 9 is relatively stable, and in the past couple of years, we definitely have seen a spike. And we know that there's an ongoing project at the high school to study the spike, to survey exiting 8th graders and to get a sense of the why behind the decision, to see if there is something that we can do programmatically, customer service wise, to reverse that trend. There may be, there may not be, right? So, but we will seek to understand it to see if there's something we can do to manage it better. And I think we need to keep an eye on it in the coming years to see where it goes.
Can I ask the question?
You can.
The percentage wise, is this saying that the 19% average of the 8th graders living in Manchester, 19% of them go to private school?
Yes.
Oh.
Yep. Did I jump both
Yeah.
towns?
Yeah,
Sorry, I
that's
jumped
both.
both
Okay.
towns. This is both towns.
Do we know anything, have we looked at any subpopulations of students to find out more about, are there specific groups of students who are more likely to exit our schools?
That's a great question.
I mean, I think that that's kind of the work that I think high school is starting to look at, is to kind of dive deeper into it. There is a slide in here that we're going to get to that kind of shows the actual exits, because this is just percentage of each year, but as Pam mentioned, you have kids moving out of town, kids moving into town, and the choice and the other things. Well, so the choice isn't in the resident population, but you have a bunch of factors that make it not really cohort based, but it's much of a snapshot in time based. But the last slide set is cohort based. So we can get to that, because I know that's a question.
And I think a big picture question for the group is, it hasn't been a focus of ours in the past. But going forward, is it the sense of this group that you want to be making a recruitment effort to try to bring back students who are electing, or families that may be electing private school, and enter into some type of a marketing campaign to do so? Or is this a condition with which it's something that is just part of the culture? I mean, given the numbers and where they start, I mean, we start with a significant number, just not entering.
Well, I
So
think,
that's just
I
a big
mean,
picture question.
yeah, and we're early in learning this. There was, there was an identifiable jump here, a spike, and now we're trying to seek to understand what it is. So before we even try and gain a sense of
Right,
that
and-
sort of thing,
and
we have to see
dissecting the
why
problem
this is
is-
happening.
The problem we want to, do we perceive that there, once we learn more, do we establish that there is something that we need to do, 8 to 9? Then do you want to broaden it and look at the whole concept of
Right.
private schooling within the two communities?
But that's a way down the line conversation.
I don't know that we should be limiting it to 8 to 9 without knowing what sort of jump would be typical for communities with similar demographics to ours. Because I think that we all probably understand that many communities see that jump, so is ours more significant than other communities? Otherwise, are the numbers overall, similar to other communities?
And remember, you'll have a non-DESE certified data set to pull from, so it will at some point become qualitative. But I certainly think you could go and ask those questions. Nothing will prevent you from doing that to learn if it's not like you'd have a comparable data set between
Right.
communities like you have for the enrollment data that DESE runs.
Erica, go ahead.
I guess I would just urge us to, the data does show something, and I mean, it shows a lot of things. And while I appreciate the desire and the need to study it further, I also think, last year we saw a 23% increase in the drop off between 8th and 9th. We can't have another 23. That would be problematic in a lot of different ways, apportionment. And I guess also having lived through this now twice, and I'm on my third rising 9th grader. So to your question, Kate, of kind of how what composition of kids is leaving, I can tell you anecdotally, it's kids that we would like to be here. It is kids that are engaged and involved, and families that are engaged and involved. And the loss of a lot of students who are engaged and involved makes a difference to the class as a whole. And the higher that percentage is, the bigger a difference it makes to that class. And so I do not think we actually should be recruiting, but I think we should, because I do think that a natural exodus is right and appropriate, and every family should make the decisions that are best for their family. However, I think we're living in an age of increased and heightened access to information. And every time I step foot on Pingree's campus or Governor's campus, I left with a glossy brochure and the name of 300 clubs that my kids could be involved in. And I think the thing that we might want to think about doing is making sure that families understand what our high school offers in a more affirmative way. And I'm not sure that, I don't want to consider that recruitment, because I don't think our goal should be getting everyone to stay here, because that's an individual personal decision. But our goal should be making sure that people understand why this school is a good fit for a lot of kids and what we have to offer. And, having had 2 kids in the high school, about to have my 3rd, there are incredible programs here that I don't think everyone knows. And I also don't think we're publicizing our outcomes in the way we might want to. So there it is. That's my pitch.
Can I just ask a question too?
Yeah.
So, because I've heard us talk a lot about this, but I'm a bit confused as to what this has to do with the budget process. I believe that this is a very important question and something that can be addressed in a lot of different areas, but I'm not sure why understanding specifically the amount of students that may or may not go into private school is important for a budget discussion.
I think it's a combined, because the conversation has started in 2 different places. It started in 2 different avenues. It started within the shift in the apportionment, because you notice that Essex
Yep.
has been pretty stable.
We
and
have the numbers for
right.
that, and that's pretty black and white, right? There's
Right.
like, it doesn't, I mean, to me, it doesn't really matter where the students are going when it comes to the budget discussion.
Right. So then the same question was arising, though, in terms of program, is this reflective, or at least these are the comments that came to me over the last couple of years. Is this change reflective of quality of program? And so given that the fact that those two questions were rising together, it's just being addressed in one conversation.
And I would say
Okay,
to the this is the answer to the significant budget question,
Mhm.
right? The
right, exactly. This is.
the decline in available students to
Yeah.
attend school. That's what's causing the major shift.
Yep. And that's very important to understand and make sure we, communicate to all of our stakeholders here.
And then the other piece that we
I just
found.
don't, I just don't understand how whether people are moving out of town or moving into town, or there are more homes being built in one town or another, whatever the reasons might be, I don't understand how that's necessarily
But
relevant.
this is not gonna be the budget presentation that we're gonna send to the towns or the town, the next meeting, public meeting, is it?
No, this is
This is
for
for
you,
us.
to answer that question.
Yeah.
That keeps through
It's
service.
been,
So we'll tie it up with this to say that we know that we're dealing with the jump in what the 2 year, let's call it the 2 year trend from 8th to 9th. One sub question that came up to your point was, I don't want to call it an allegation because it wasn't intended that way, but an assertion that, well, just more Manchester kids are leaving to go to private school, and that's what's driving the apportionment offset to Essex. And I think that's where we were shocked digging through this more than anything, which is those Manchester, this is where I see a lot of stability over time, right? The Manchester numbers for accessing private school, whether you do a head count or percentage, is relatively stable over time. I would make that claim. And the differential between 8th and 9, over time is smaller than that between, in Essex, between 8th and 9th grade. The real spike within the private school access is the 12% to 23% average in Essex.
Yeah, and that stat, it was a 2012 to 2023, so we'll correct that typo at the beginning. The 69% increase, that's a 10-year change.
Yeah.
That I don't think we are expecting to find as much, whereas this has been more stable with the past couple of year item that we're investigating.
can I clarify, are these numbers of private school attendance, is that including North Shore Tech?
No.
That's not including North Shore Tech, okay.
They're not private.
Because those, I know, but I just didn't know if we were grouping
Well, that
other
was the funny
schools.
thing. So just to go back to the whole Ian process, not to bore you.
Yeah.
It was on the Word document and then we're like, oh, wait, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So that was one of the types of things we had to fix. Then we had some years where added district placements were on the Word document. Well, those are part of our enrollment, so that had to come out of the data set too. So there was just a lot of scrubbing because we had never used that process to run a master data analysis. So
Okay.
we won't have that problem next year.
So
This is
we're,
This is part of the point, I mean,
Yeah.
you look at the numbers here, it's like one student, difference, it's like two students. I mean,
I tend to agree personally, based on what I saw in the numbers. I was surprised, but I think just from a budget standpoint, when I think enrollment's going down and costs go up, people say, tell us why. And so we've talked over the past couple of years about the difference between class size and general ed classrooms, which are FTEs coming down versus changes in special ed. That trend seems to have
Very
stabilized with
important
this
to budget,
budget.
so.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then there's the Essex component too. And so when you have a separate set of folks saying, what's going on with this? Let's just deal with it all together. I think I
Okay.
tend to agree with you.
But 15 kids also makes a difference in the class. Like 15 that's a 15% of your class. That's.
Oh, no, I mean, I'm talking about the difference, right? I mean, there's always going to be families, no matter what town you live in, that want to send their children to private schools for different reasons. But what I'm saying is when the difference is between 15 and 14, that's one kid, right?
Right, but then
And, it wasn't, we can look at like the 1 year difference, but, so.
so I don't want us,
It went
I don't want
from,
to
eight
to
to
stifle
10,
this,
you know,
but also I
2017,
want to make
it's
sure we don't
9,
get,
right? Like,
I also want
I
to make
mean-
sure we don't get lost in this, because we still do have the budget
Yep.
part of this too, which I think is what Chris was getting to. So Anna, did you have a final question about this?
Time to the budget. So I think what will help to explain the question, well, this is separate than the 8th grade, 9th grade question. But going back to the enrollment apportionment versus the budget. What would be helpful is to show the enrollment, and I think other town officials have been asking that as well. Break it down, the special ed versus the non-special ed in the total, other than the total enrollment. And what would be even more useful is if we actually break down the teachers, the number of FTEs as such as well, so people can see the trend.
I think our budget has the FTEs that way, but not the enrollment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you have the data?
Well, a lot of it's on the DESE website. Again, part of the Ian project, we did go back through some old periods. And I think when we were at the Essex FinCom, this came up where there was a period there where the data didn't seem to jive. It was like a 2 or 3 year period. But we do have that data. It's publicly available, so we can get you what we have for sure.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
All right.
And again, I want to
And by
make
the
sure
way,
I'm clear, like, I don't think this is a not,
Okay.
this is an important question.
Right.
I just don't understand how it's an important question for a budget. That's it.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
so,
Other questions, or you want to go to the full budget?
well, if there are other questions, I want to make sure people have a chance to ask them, but I also want us to exhibit some restraint, recognizing that it's 8:16 at night.
I would close saying, I think we're all on the same page, that we see what's happening.
Mhm.
We know we need to learn more about it. In the learning more, it might provide us some direction on how to approach it. And to Erica's point, I think she's right. We can do a better job at promoting ourselves. That's some of the work we're attempting to undertake with Guilfoyle.
Yep.
We aren't, unless we invest directly in it, budget question,
Right.
we're not going to reach the level of a Pingree or a GDA or a St. John's in terms of turning out marketing. If it's something we think we need to commit to because we feel like there's a source we want to tap there, and I haven't even formulated an opinion or a recommendation on it yet, we might want to talk about that more in the future.
Put that on our summer list because the high school, I'm actually really eager to find out what the high school learns with this project of reaching out to the people that have made these choices too. Okay, is there anything else we absolutely have to dive into on the enrollment before we actually talk about the budget? Okay.
I'll bring up the budget.
So, and I just want to, I know you're going to go through this, but
Yeah, I
so,
mean, Go ahead.
no, go ahead, go
I
ahead.
mean, typically, we don't run through the budget document in
Right.
public session. That's not, I mean,
Okay.
I have many different ways that I can put people to sleep, but that's
Yeah.
not one of them that I've employed in the past, so I won't be doing that.
Yes, growth
Yeah,
mindset.
yes. However, we do unveil it at this time of year, which is to go from the tentative budget, which is really a high level item for the regional agreement, to give people a heads up as they're starting, the towns, they're starting to do their budget development.
Yeah.
I think we've said many times when Pam and I started here, you know, the whole personnel line would be like, oh, let's just put 3.5 on there for now until we go into it. And like everything now is a line by line buildup. It's because we get so many questions and we get why it's important, and we don't really want to have a big surprise in January leading into budget season. So that's good news. This is just gives everyone the opportunity to start to see the details of what's happening in different areas and really, you know, have as much transparency as possible, plus consistency from year to year. So that's what this document enables us to do. It is draft. Sometimes when we go through it, we find things that need to be corrected or mistakes or what have you, because there are many schedules there. Typically, there aren't many of those, but please let me know if you find any. But it also enables people to start asking questions about what's happening and why, so they can understand more of the story. So I think with that said, and knowing that I've provided a big update, I don't know if there are any, I mean, Pam, are there any items in the memo that you want me to say for public group, aside from the school committee, people might be listening?
I think we should go in a Q&A format, which is, there is nothing that has changed in this budget other than inclusion of more detail.
Yeah.
So if the more detail has brought up questions that you would like to ask at the public, in the public meeting, let's ask them, let's answer them, and then we can talk a little bit more about where we go from here. This budget's going to be shared with the towns. When we get to the draft full budget, we typically share it with the towns. We have a meeting scheduled on the 26th to go to the Manchester FinCom. It's our annual meeting with them to answer their questions about the budget. And we have our meeting on the 24th
Public hearing.
to get
yeah.
more public input. So I don't think we need to go through the same presentation we did twice already. So if there are questions, let's just get into what's on your mind.
And I would just like to say, as we lead into this, so Anna's eagle eye I mean, that's why we meet in finance subcommittee before we come here too. So Anna was able to ask a lot of really good detailed questions. My questions are kind of different. So go ahead, Anna.
I think it might be helpful if you explain to the group, and we talked about this yesterday, is why is the FTE count only three less versus the budget narrative
Yeah,
being
Where's
saying
that
four?
found?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So thank you. And so there's so many things sometimes that until somebody who's maybe less in it asks me, I may not realize. So, we have on our typical schedule, the three first pages. The first is a revenue. It shows how we pay for things, and that's where the town assessments are. And I know if you're a town finance committee member or someone in the community, those are the numbers you might be honing in on in terms of what this might cost. The second and third pages are the summary of spending, and with the page 2 being around personnel and page 3 being around all other operating expenses. We tend to summarize the total full-time equivalents or FTE number of heads. And the difference between a person and an FTE, for those who might be listening, is if you have 2 people who are working half-time, that's 1 FTE, 1 full-time equivalent. Those numbers are summarized at the bottom, but as you can see, they summarize a lot of different lines. And when we talked in our budget presentations at the tentative budget cycle about a reduction of 4 FTE, those were in teaching positions. And so, for example, I think there, if I recall correctly, there are 2 in general ed and 2 in special ed that are being part of those reductions. And they're all enrollment need-based. And however, there are other line items here that might be changing. And the one that's most notable is the teaching assistants. That's one that is really based on students' IEPs. And so we've had some presentations in prior budget cycles where we've talked about the continuum from, IEP to in-district services to in-district programs to out-of-district placement. And we've talked about how sometimes teaching assistants can be employed on what we call a one-to-one teaching assistant to student basis to help support that student in a classroom, to help ensure that they can stay in the classroom and not need to go to an out-of-district placement. And so those changes, they happen within a school year. So those are numbers that go up and go down. And so when we do things like budget transfers, for example, we'll give you hey, here's where we're at mid-year, or we did one on 11/1 to say, here's what we're seeing for staffing. And it would not be uncommon to see changes in those teaching assistant FTE. So if you look at that line, for example, and this is where my age is starting to look at my vision is starting to be an issue. You can see, those have creeped up over the past couple of years from 23.4, not by a lot, to 26.3. So that's, and I'm looking at fiscal 22 to fiscal 24. So that's an increase in FTE that's going to hit the bottom line. So if you're just looking at the bottom line, you might be saying, hey, why are we reducing 4, but that number's going up? I would really encourage you to look at the classroom teachers line, which talks about what's happening. That's the most directly tied to enrollment, as well as the special ed teacher number, which is the most directly tied to student need. And there are some footnotes that we typically include in there. There are, fractional numbers here and there. I think at the middle school and high school, where you might have a 0.6 change in special ed teachers, for example, related to funding that might come from our funding we receive from students coming in district, from other communities where those school districts pay a tuition to us, just like we pay to other public school districts. So that can have a slight offset in the FTE. We put that note in the footnotes. But I think that's short answer, long answer to Anna's question.
Other questions?
Touch on school.
Does anyone else have questions?
Well, it's not a question, it's more.
Yeah.
I know one of the budget drivers, obviously, is big one's personnel, and just looking at, I don't know what page it's on. Before the box of where the distribution of the teachers based on their experience. It's, sorry about like
16.
that obviously costs but I think that's a credit to the school that the majority of the teachers fall in that. I wish I had the box. There it is.
Page 16.
The step 15, kind of across the board there, 98.7 out of the 154. Good teaching, senior teaching, like that's what schools desire. So, like that's just a credit to the district that, it costs more money and it's expensive because the longer you're here, the more you get paid, but it's ties back to the quality of education. So it's just money well spent. It's nice to see that that's the largest share of the teaching staff.
Thank you.
So no question related to that. Just
Are there any other questions about this? I know I have one, but I don't want to, I'm gonna let it be. Okay, so my question actually isn't for you. My question is sort of for the group of the committee, because I think I know the answer, but it's come up a couple times, and I was at the Essex Board of Selectmen last night. So in our, I think in our first meeting about this, and then in the public hearing a little bit, we've talked a couple times now about, the idea that, yes, we're committed to supporting the idea of taking out reserves as a revenue source for this budget. We know that leaves the gap, or that widens the gap, and that impacts the towns. What I think would be helpful from our town partners, in our collaboration meeting, it became clear that it's becoming more clear to our town partners, at least in Essex for sure, that it's not just a 1-year issue. That once we fix this 1 year, once they find a way to fund this 1 year, then we've reset, and there's still going to be a gap, each following year, because our growth, the spending growth outpaces the cap. So I think that what would be helpful for them would be to get a sense of whether we're interested in continuing that idea. In fact, I heard that language last night. Are we trying, as a committee, interested in steering and supporting the idea of not using reserves for our operational budget over the next couple years as well? Because that's some of the question that's coming up, so that the town can determine, well, are we going to cobble together what we need for this year, or are we going to be looking at a much bigger plan to do that? I don't know that I don't think it's fair to ask us for a commitment, but I guess I'm interested to hear the sentiment of the committee of, is this something we are supporting as a general practice, which was kind of what I thought based on our conversation, but I don't want to speak out of turn and represent the will of the committee separately from that. So what are our thoughts on that? Anna, go ahead.
Does everyone have the history first of sort of what we've
I
done?
think we've done that. I think, yeah,
Like a brief,
I think we're pretty well.
brief history?
Yeah.
So I think it depends on the, which we don't have, is the reserve policy. What we are comfortable with as a district, and how low do we want to go into, and how much do we want to tap into? So even if we don't have a policy in place, we need to have agree on some of a guideline on what we want the policy to be before the policy to be formalized, before we make that decision.
And again, I'm not looking for a commitment. I'm just trying to see our people feeling like, okay, well, we're headed the direction of looking at policies that encourage us to not use reserve funds as operational as much as possible, or are we trying to go a different direction? Go ahead, Erica.
I guess as a member of the policy committee, it was my understanding that is at least what the group wanted us to explore, was present a reserve policy that limits using reserves to more extraordinary circumstances. I think as a practical matter, having read a handful of these reserve policies now, it strikes me that I can envision a number of emergencies in any given budget cycle that force a town, a municipality, or a school committee to, notwithstanding a reserve policy, continue to use their reserves. So there is a part of me that wonders where this exercise leads, but I am interested in your overall question, because my thought as a member of the policy subcommittee is that we will be delivering for your review and consideration policies that do limit reserves and set a limit and discourage using reserves for operating.
And so maybe that's where some of our status update will help next time around too, because my expectation was that you guys were going to be studying what the towns have in place, what other districts have in place, that sort of thing, and then coming with a recommendation, certainly with recommendation from Pam and Avi in there. It wouldn't surprise me for that to be the case, but I didn't know it was kind of a foregone conclusion.
I mean, I'll ask these guys, but I feel like anywhere that I've seen that has a reserve policy, by virtue of having a reserve policy, you're suggesting not to use your reserves for operations. So, like, that is the. I
I'm
don't think
with
there's any
you. I
policy
just want to make sure that we say some of this in public meeting because it's a question that the answer hasn't come through at the town level. And I see Ruthie waving her hand in the corner of my eye, and I will acknowledge
I only
the,
did it once.
I will acknowledge the presence of the chairperson of the Board of Selectmen. Does everyone feel comfortable with me allowing her to speak?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, school committee, and I apologize. So I did not raise that question last night, and the reason I kind of want to clarify this is I sat in on a school committee meeting a couple of meetings ago, not the last one, but it might have been the one before.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that the committee discussed the use of reserves.
Mhm.
And I thought I heard them say, we're absolutely not using reserves this year, and we have no intention of doing so in the future. My town accountant said it best. He said, people become addicted to reserves. And I think Avi kind of echoed that, which is that you get in a habit of using reserves, but those don't get replaced. And then you're building on those year after year, and then the school has to continue to fund those as the town would. So typically reserves are used for one-time capital expenses or emergencies. That's what I thought I heard previous
That's
meetings
what I
ago,
thought.
so I thought that was clear. I
So
was
did I.
unsure why that question came up.
Because that did get brought up last night. I'm not making this up, you
No,
guys. So I thought maybe I had missed something at our own committee level. Okay.
I don't know that it was publicly stated. I think for people that attend a meeting.
Yeah.
It was heard.
Got it.
I went back to the group today in an email and said that was asked and answered, and my understanding is that they will not be using reserves into the future. I understand needing to say it at a public meeting, and I appreciate that, so that the number of people on the phone will hear that.
Yeah.
And I understand the reason for not wanting to use reserves.
Mhm.
Certainly, as on the receiving end, we as a town appreciate that, especially when the apportionment hits us. However, we understand why you can't. So that's why we come to you and we say, please sharpen the pencil, work with us.
Yep.
How do we make this better? Because with the apportionment, with the budget being what it is and our apportionment hitting and the numbers we need, we're at, for Essex, I think the number is like an 8.6% increase for us.
Went
this
down to
year.
8.4.
Is it
isn't it?
8.4? Okay, it's over 8. Let's just go with it's over 8. So it's a big number.
Yeah.
So that's why
Yeah.
we're
Of course.
asking. And then also, just if you can touch on the potential for doing an override for the capital expense. So the reason that was asked last night at our meeting, we asked for, you guys are looking at using some money on major capital expense. And we
Yeah.
said we would feel the town would appreciate being able to do that as an override for one-time capital expense versus like building it into the budget, because then, as we know, it builds onto the basis of that budget every year. So let's just call it $1 million project. We put that into the budget, and then next year we're building onto that million that was used for a capital project this year, but it still rolls forward. So that was,
So I had touched on that earlier, that in the readout of, or report out for collaboration group, that's something that we need to discuss at collaboration group, because that's a multi-town discussion. So that's something that we need to discuss at collaboration group. I wish we had over the last 2 years, because now we're already in it with this gigantic capital thing, and we're kind of already in that boat. But again, thank you all for indulging me. I really wanted to bring this up because I thought I had missed something when it came up again as a question last night, but clearly not. Jake, go ahead.
I would personally be able to engage in this conversation much more if I could engage with the multi-year perspective, which I think we're coming up to next.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this has to do with,
Sure.
what are our potential needs
Yep.
3 to 5 years from now?
Yep.
right.
And then part of what we're getting into is a little bit of the financing question
Yep.
rather than the budget question.
Right.
So I think if we can transition to that multi-year thing, I think we can get into some of these longer term strategy questions a little better.
Are there any other questions though on these? charts and
There
graphs in
is
the same
one
way?
question that Erica had asked, I think it's worth bringing up because it jumped at me when we were going through it, and it jumped at you on the last page, which is if you look at the total spending by school,
Mhm.
they're way off, right? So you have Memorial in Essex, like 3 times that of the high school and middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of a layperson's explanation, that's the rolling through of reduction of heads and the movement of an FTE off of a grant and into the budget at the elementary level. So we've been carrying the 1.0 math specialist that was brought on using ESSER dollars on a grant, but now that's been put back onto the operating for a split of 0.6 to Memorial, 0.4 to Essex. That's how we split our shared personnel. So that's going to elevate their FTE, even though our total is going down. And then the identified enrollment reduction heads are flowing through the middle and the high school. In addition to pulling out partial FTE to be assigned to tuition payment. So it's kind of just the fits and starts, but we're gonna add some notes to the bottom of that page because it's more a representation of how the budget is flowing through and not so much a statement of investment. And I think it could be looked at differently.
Sure.
Without an explanation.
Before we
That's
move
fair.
on to multi-year.
Yeah.
And you might want to address this in your narratives.
Yep.
So in the budget book, you can really see it, but if you were to look at, if you were to do, like the different school costs, the total budget that you have different pages, divide it into like the different, the head counts with the different fiscal years. It still doesn't answer the question, because one of the questions that everybody's asking is, why are the enrollment going down and expenses still going up? And your answer, the answer is like, it's because the special ed, because like, the elementary school, there are specific limit of the class size of the teacher and all that stuff. But the thing is, it doesn't explain high school and middle school. And if you look at the trend overall, all the schools all together, it still doesn't explain that. So what I would recommend is maybe when we are putting together like a budget narratives, to kind of dive a little bit more into this, so we can come ahead of it to know exactly how to explain this. Because from what I'm looking at, it still doesn't explain. That's why I was asking if you can provide the teachers' headcounts by the different grades, then I can help you to better analyze it, or even like the
Teacher
salary.
headcounts by grade.
I mean, yeah, the teachers' FTEs by the different grades, yes.
We have them by school, so if you're looking at a school by school per pupil, even though there are some major asterisks that I would provide, you would have that data.
If you have
but
by
not
school, that'd be great.
Yeah,
by
that's in the budget document currently, the FTE by school. But I think the biggest thing to remember are two items that, one, per pupil that you typically see on the Department of Ed website is based off of all funds, including budgetary funds, but also grants and revolving. But two, just remember at the high school, you have other programs like athletics, for example, and student activities. Those are things where you on a per pupil basis, let me say it this way. If you look at the Chapter 70 funding formula, the state provides more dollars as you move up to the grade levels because the type of programming that's involved, for example, athletics or
But those are separate. So the school, we can talk about this separately. So I think what would also be helpful is
they're just, I guess I just want to say before we move on, it's just that if you look at the budget page for the high school, for example, you will see that there are additional costs that won't be in some of the other schools, like the athletics program. So, but I didn't want to cut you off. I just want to make sure that I got that last piece out. But what was
No,
that you
no,
gonna
no,
say?
but every budget books is consistent. So if you look at consistency and then look at the trend, we are getting more expensive. Because all the years are excluding all these
You know, on a
activities.
per pupil basis?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, that's what happens when
inflation.
enrollment is going down and costs are growing at stable level. And the reason for that, as we've talked about, is primarily because while the classroom general ed teachers, which is our number one cost of staffing, has been stable and coming down over time, the special ed needs which is really a higher per pupil cost is going up. So, yeah.
that's why the enrollment number, special ed versus non-special ed will be important.
We can show it. I don't think it's going to answer that question, the pure enrollment number. Because there isn't. The 22-to-1 works K to 8. It stops working 9 to 12 because it's a whole different configuration of classes and it's more than 5, right? It's more than just one classroom per teacher. And then there are differentiated student to teacher ratios per special ed program, per assignment, and per grade. So it's I don't know that, I know what you're trying to build. You're trying to build a pure formula that says X students should equal this amount of staffing, and I don't know, we can try, but I don't know how we're gonna get there. Is that what we're trying to do?
No.
Okay.
If you step away from the formula though for a second and say, and look at our narrative, I do think Anna's right, that one of the real challenges we're gonna face is people saying to us, your enrollment's declining, your costs are going up. I don't understand why. And I know we've talked about this. I'm not asking you to explain it right now. I'm just saying that I think Anna's point is maybe there's more we can do with the numbers to better tell the story that we're trying to tell.
And I would just like to say with that story, that the question keeps coming up from people who weren't here last spring, because last spring we sat through presentations like only about that, specifically about that. I think we'll probably have opportunity to have, I mean, I'm sure you're building that in for some of this spring. So we're going to have those specific presentations, which really do a good job. Even some of our biggest skeptics have come to understand it through the presentations that they do give. It's there.
To the public.
Yes.
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 Yeah, there's a series of slides that are entitled Enrollment Decline Does Not Equal Declining Costs.
Right.
Straight up. Costs continue to rise.
And we will see those.
Yeah, I can pull those together.
I don't think I got all of her questions, but I thought that was part of it.
But maybe we can dive a little more into your part of the question
I'm
too, in
probably just
finance
not
subcommittee, so that we
It's just-
can,
I think what Anna's
get
saying is,
into
can we provide more granular data that helps to cement the story that we've been telling before? And I think that's the question of how much, to what extent, what percentage of people are asking that more granular question versus people who may not be familiar with what we talked about last year?
right.
Which I think hits the main point, but of course, I'm here to crunch numbers, so when you guys want me to crunch numbers, crunch the numbers you want me to
And
crunch.
part of the numbers we're also crunching numbers. We have, we recently contracted to have our cyclical, program review for special education, and embedded in that is going to be an analysis of the programming, the quantified analysis, as well as a qualitative, analysis of where our program's at and any recommendations for reduction. So there'll be a whole separate report trying to answer this question.
The way that I've always looked at this, we have a small district, right? There are grade class sizes that are only 60 students versus some grade class sizes that are 120 students or 140 students. And when you have a small class grade like that come through, you can't just get rid of half the teachers for a year, right? Like the costs don't align up, right? So you're going to see bumps and spikes on a year-to-year basis, depending on because we look at enrollment, it's like, oh, the enrollment's going down. Yeah, but that's district-wide. District-wide, a percentage or two makes a difference. But at the grade level where you have to make those decisions and changes, you can't, like a 10% drop doesn't change your costs at all. Right? And that's the way that I've always approached it and looked at it when I've looked through the numbers. It's not a apples to apples comparison. You can't expect, it's not the way the school district works.
Understood,
Yeah.
but I think the
And
devil's in the
it's-
details. And that's why I think if we have the enrollment data, like the sped versus the non-sped, I think that would really help. Because I get
Who
that.
do we want
it's
to
close.
share that with? Like who is the stakeholder for that information?
I don't know about you, but I think if I understand that a little bit better, when people are asking us, I can help to better support and also tell the story about why, because even these questions are still getting asked. The enrollment, even though that we did a great presentation, like, however many years, the question's still there. So I think, at least for me, I would like to help to better to explain to stakeholders, why that is. And it cannot just
Well,
be.
the explanation that I gave, that's not good, but.
I'm gonna
I
call
don't
rabbit hole
think
on
that-
this, friends. We can't solve this tonight. We
Right, I agree.
noted all around,
Can I
but we
just-
need to move on. Go ahead. Final
I
thought.
don't know that enrollment data around sped is going to get you the information that you want because
Maybe
there's
not.
no set number that each sped student costs, right? The amount that each sped student services costs varies wildly. And so I don't know that just having an enrollment number is going to give you the data.
Comparing to the expense, yeah, because right now we do have expense separated out, the sped expenses.
Yes.
All I'm saying is, I would love to look into it. if we haven't, and it doesn't hurt.
Noted. And I don't mean that, you know,
Yeah, I-
putting it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we're going to move on now. So are we into multi-year yet?
Sure.
Anything you
Great.
want to say before we do that? You want me to take the, Matt?
No,
No?
you have to go on and project through WebEx. Because that's our OWL hub.
Okay, so how, do you want me to send this to you?
Sure.
Mm,
Teresa, while we have time, can you just kind of reiterate, like, kind of the expectations for the rest of tonight? Like, is it just FYI informative with questions? Is there like an outcome that we're looking for, just so that I kind of,
Mhm.
I know we've done a couple different budget topics.
Yep. So
Thank
multi-model work, I'm guessing we're looking at multi-year expectations and what they have crunched to look ahead. We've talked about some of this at the collaborative team level, and we don't have to vote on anything. This is for us to
Just to-
learn.
Okay,
I'm actually looking for direction
Yeah.
on what to crunch.
okay, that's helpful.
Because we presented the budget,
Mhm.
right? So we presented a budget now. We're calling it level services. We're understanding and hearing the feedback that level services may not be the phrase that everybody wants to use. We could call it a maintenance of effort budget, if that is a better, sends a more positive message. But basically, we presented a budget that allows us to support our goals as stated, maintain class size and the breadth and scope of program that we offer, right? So there aren't any service reductions. Doesn't mean we're gonna do everything exactly the same. You
Right.
heard about a whole bunch of new ideas that aren't, but that can be managed within a carry forward budget. What we need to know from the group is a little bit of where you were going before. What's the sentiment of this group? What's the direction from this group in terms of other pieces to the budget that you want to pursue? At one point, we talked about stabilization.
Right.
And building in an operating line to annually fund a replenishment of our reserves.
Right.
Geared toward capital improvements and emergencies. We know we're going to, I think we could get overly consumed by policy when we
Yeah.
just really have some practical common sense decisions to
Mhm.
make, right? So on back of the envelope, we've got $3 million in reserves with 1.5 million committed to fields. So
Yeah.
we are going to cut our reserves in half this year by making good on commitments we've made for capital improvements. We also know we have a facilities plan that's showing that we have multi-million-dollar liabilities at Essex Elementary. So should we be considering a way to start building back our stabilization reserve accounts after the expenditure? Knowing that we have that 1.5 million expenditure, we're going to have our reserves, we have liabilities. Do we want to look at do you want to consider using reserves as a source of revenue? Is it a definite no? Is it a maybe? Where's the committee on that? Does the committee want to ask for money within this budget to replenish reserves? We're going to spend 1.5 million. We've spent, let's call it, again, I'm using back of the envelope math, $330,000 per year for 3 years. Do we want to build back a replenishment for the amount of money that was used to put into the operating budget?
Right.
Depending on how you think you're going to ask the towns to move forward with funding this budget, should we be looking at a multi-year number? So increasing our budget ask this year so that we are secure for 3 years out, 4 years out, 5 years out. So if you tell us you want a multi-year number, then we can crunch it. But we need like a ballpark to work in or direction that the committee wants to go in terms of what its big picture goal is for this budget.
So real
All right,
quick, when we asked for the last correction 7 years ago, was it?
Mhm.
What was the guidance at that point?
At that point, we went through 2 exercises. We went through an aspirational exercise and built an ask up to, I think it was 1.5 million, maybe 1.7 million, which included getting out of using reserves.
Okay.
So plus
Yeah, the
some other
numbers don't matter
investments
to
that
me,
they-
just the concepts.
So the concept was go big and invest.
Mhm.
The resolution was, I believe it was a $750,000 or $800,000 override that was manageable by both towns in ways that they saw fit. So it really
What
ended
did
up
that-
being just covering use of reserves in the budget.
Okay.
There was, well, actually,
And then we had like the very next year, we had a 10% increase in our healthcare costs, so that was wiped out, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
there were some buybacks in there too.
yeah, so it was, I think the three scenarios we had were just replace the reserves, straight number. Two was to reinstate a couple things that had been cut in the prior year or two, and three was a kind of build forward to a program goal that we thought would be, enhancement, I think was the phrase that we used, and we went with the middle one, which had, I think, a small number of FTE replacements, maybe 2.0 FTE, something like that,
Mhm.
over the reserve item that got pulled out of the budget.
And where
And
we're
it was-
at, and where we're at right now doesn't include replacing any of the cuts that we made last year.
Correct,
Okay,
or any, yep. And I think what's, yes,
program cuts, yeah.
correct.
Okay. So then to structure this, I guess what I would like to do, because now that you say that, it brings us back to that slide that had the 1, 2, 3. And so before the budget hearing and the things that have happened since budget hearings, meetings, and whatnot, the sense of the committee was that we did not want to use reserves as an operating cost. There was interest at the time, this was all informal, but there was interest in considering building in a stabilization line. But as I recall, the committee wasn't real excited in the moment about offering a replenishment of reserves because of the hit we're already asking on our towns. I will say so the question is, has anything changed for anyone? For me, one thing has changed, and that is that I am firm on the idea that we need to have stabilization funds, particularly for capital costs, but I mean, I know we need to have reserves for operational costs as well for emergencies and things, but stabilization funds. However, since we met in the budget hearing, it was brought up as an idea that it might be more workable for at least one of our towns to look at things moving forward with having debt exclusion overrides for capital projects. I think it's worth exploring that conversation in our next collaboration group because we haven't heard anything about it from Manchester. We haven't had that conversation. It just sort of got brought up at collaboration, then it came up again at Board of Health. It had come up at the public hearing, but that would impact my opinion on building in stabilization. If our 2 member towns want to choose a trajectory like that, then I would want their input on that. So that to me is a change that I want it to be done somehow, but if they want to start this conversation, I want to give space for that conversation to happen. So that's something that's important to me. Whether it's a quick or a long conversation, I don't know. And then my second point, and then I'll take other comments as well, is that what I just want to make sure, my priority here is that we're discussing things in terms of the district needs at this table, but that the financing of it happen outside of it. So for instance, I don't want us to ask for a big gigantic number. What I'd like us to do is set the expectation of here's what this year is going to take. We'd like to, we've decided we want to build back in X, Y, or Z. We need to deal with stabilization in some form. And then let the towns choose, okay, well, we're gonna model this out. It's gonna cost us, here, and then we've got the gap next year and the following year, and they can choose whether to ask for that all at once, whether to ask for it over time, that sort of thing. But I would rather leave that up to the towns. That's my personal opinion based on what I'm witnessing. Jake, go ahead. And Kate.
Just asking a point, I thought we were gonna have some sort of information or presentation about some modeling,
We can model anything that you would like to see in terms of,
but do you have anything to share
Implication.
tonight?
Yeah, we're gonna,
And while they're pulling that, did you want to share something? Or ask a question?
Just about your word choice. So in the past, we've talked about a budget correction, and now you're talking about an override for capital expenses. Do you mean an override, or do you mean a correction, whether that comes from town reserves or?
What's being brought forth is kind of a whole different framework for how to do this. So that rather than, yes, it would be a series of overrides whenever we have capital projects over a certain threshold that we then, I don't think the Fields is up for debate here. We're already in this at this point. But if there were, you know, a major renovation of something that you go to the towns each time and they choose to have a debt exclusion override for a capital purpose at that point, because then it doesn't reset the operating budget for growth for the next year. It's an idea that's been brought up a couple times in the last month. Again, it's not that I'm not selling it to anyone here. I'm just saying I'd like us to leave space for our
Right.
two-member towns to explore it together, because one seems to, it's coming from Essex, but it's new. And I don't want to commit to a certain thing without letting that play out.
You want that first.
It may be a non-starter for Manchester. I have no idea.
I just want to show them.
How would it even work then?
Yeah, that's, I have so many questions about the logistics of it, but I'm not sure they're
So,
asking.
That's just it. I'd like to let us get to we have a collaboration meeting next week to discuss it. Let's see if it's even something to explore. And if not, do you see what I'm saying with that, though? Just to let the conversation happen
I feel
on
like
that?
what's difficult is looking at the long term and knowing that eventually Essex Elementary is going to need to be replaced, that asking our member towns to fully extend themselves now for an operating budget is difficult. No, we're going to be asking our towns to extend themselves again for an Essex Elementary in the not so distant future. And I think that is hopefully, I would assume what's going on at collaboration meetings is planning for that.
So you're thinking, Kate, that it would be better to ask for a correction to our budget 3 years in a row before, you know, as we're leading up to
No.
Can we just kind of get back to the agenda and business, just in terms of, not that this is.
That's what this is for now.
Like, this meeting is confusing to me in terms of like, I usually go with like an expectation, like what's being presented, what my expectation, and I'm kind of lost on that right now. Like, there's
Okay.
this whole separate topic being discussed kind of informally. There's another presentation, like, I'd like to like know where we are. Because it's making
Okay.
me uncomfortable. Yeah.
All right, so maybe I'm misunderstanding, but my understanding was that you wanted a sentiment from the committee, some opinions about where we are on those three things to build for moving forward, to crunch more numbers for moving forward, but at the same time, you have some multi-year analyses here.
But yes, and we can run scenarios based on your questions.
Yeah.
Right, so it doesn't make sense for us to start throwing numbers in the model and say, we could do this, we could do that. What we need is, we have, big picture question, we have a level services budget. We could just we could bring that to the next public hearing, get feedback on that. Hearing no objection, committee deliberates on what the inputs are, passes the final budget on the 7th, and it goes in as is the level service budget. Is there more that you
We
want
want
to
more
build
in this.
into the
Got it.
budget? Going back to the original questions around level services, multi-year support, replenishment of reserves, or other things I'm not even presenting to you.
Right.
So,
And this information will
and
share
then,
what?
and if, let's say Teresa says, well, I think, or we'll use Chris. Chris has said in the past, we should try to make it good for 10 years. What might that number be? Well, Avi can plug in a number to this model and we can show you what that's going to do to the out years and what it's going to grow like. And then you can kind of envision what that looks like.
Yep.
Right. So all this is not talking. Avi built it, so he should have should be able to explain it to you, but very generally, this is just a set of assumptions about how we grow. And when we start plugging in additional monies over level services, what happens?
So this is where we say, I really want to see last year's XYZ built back in. This is where I say, if we're going to be talking about these things, I want to see some form of how, if it has to be built into the budget, but the health and wellness category is critical to be updated. I don't know if that's going to have budget implications. If so, I'd love to see that built in.
So like I know the foreign language program, there's a separate conversation previously about it could be taken potentially in a different form, but is it fair to say like something related to the foreign language
You may.
piece? There we go. I'm back on track. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Chris's point earlier, hearing about, we had a revenue correction in fiscal 16. 2 years later, we had a big health insurance challenge. And I think really what this tool is designed to do, which is in the budget brochure every year as a kind of a static document. It's not really our budget for what we're projecting. It's more to show how do we work on this process of not just looking at a given year, but looking at a multi-year trend, especially when you get to situations where reserves are being used. Sounds like there's consensus here in this meeting, not to speak for you guys, but I'm hearing it, that, we don't want to be doing that, which we've been talking about. Then what is the implication? And so really, all this is designed to do is to say, if spending grows like this with a stable budget, what does, given our revenue profile, and given that we are talking about maybe not using revenue from reserves, what happens to town assessments? What does this look like for the town? What does this mean for the town? So we can kind of marry. We want our program to look like this with that would result in asking the towns for that.
Yeah.
That's the purpose. So with that said, I mean, I think generally what we would look at, and this right now is just set to maintenance of effort, level services, whatever you call it. If the number is around 4% with trend lines that we've seen kind of like this between personnel and everything else, and I'm just going to remind you, I don't know how I get to it, but I think it's right here. Can I do that?
Mhm.
Yes. There's a slide in the budget brochure that we send out to
It
everyone.
doesn't switch automatically.
Oh, it doesn't? Take a second.
You gotta shut one and go back in and pull up the other.
Never mind. Okay, if you just look at page 4 of our budget brochure, you have that line where you can see that our spending, and I'm just gonna read it, we are at 2837, 2930, 2841, a pretty tight band. It may not be the same every year, but basically in the 3 to 4 range, it typically high threes to low, just below 4 range. If that's the spending trajectory, it's fine. That's what we would put in the top part of this model. And that's why it's set at 4%.
And
It's
that's-
arbitrary. We could kind of move it to whatever, but that's a number that really shouldn't be unfamiliar to anybody at this point, given the very consistent spending that we've been talking about, which is why, thankfully, in this budget cycle, we haven't been hearing people say, what's going on with spending? I think people generally understand their spending picture has been fairly consistent.
And that's including the projected,
This is
the
the-
negative savings, yeah? I can.
This is the tentative budget right now as it stands at 30.47, which is a 416 number. And then here are the revenue pieces down below. And in the old model, we would talk about reserves right here. But now in this type of a model, what we'd really be talking about would be a gap. And the question is, what is the number that is the gap that would get the towns down below? Where is it? Right here in yellow to assessments in the out years of 3.5. If that is the target that people, for whatever reason, felt like is the number we would try and send to the towns, because it has been somewhat consistently around there. It's a number we've talked about. What does that look like?
How many zeros am I adding on after these?
3.
Okay.
Sorry, I put it up in
Okay.
the top left. So.
Oh,
you
I
can-
see. Okay.
But after 3, it becomes just even, every year it becomes a little more meaningless, right?
After 3 years, yeah, I think that that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you can see just with looking at 3 years forward, you can get to $1.5 million with a typical spending pattern and so let's just say we have a revenue correction for this year.
Yeah.
Everyone is happy, it works out, taxpayers support it. We move on, we're now looking at fiscal 25. Where are we at? Are we back in the same boat? Well, with the 4% typical level spending, you might be looking at a $230,000 deficit to hit a 3.5 target, okay, before apportionment.
Right.
And you can see how that built. This is something we've talked about. So you could quickly, over 3 years, get back to about $1.5 million of that deficit. Now, you could deal with that, I have in here, just to get to 4%. Sometimes we've typically had budget efficiencies. Those numbers are up here, where we've had to reduce coming from tentative into final. That's something that we can do to hit the 4% number. And then the other thing has just been, either use of reserves, we don't want to do that, or a number that goes over 3.5%. Or a number that we kind of factor into what we're asking for right now for the 3 years. Yes.
So So the short version of what I hear you saying, given this, given the assumptions you put in with level services,
Yep.
4% total growth on the district side.
Yep,
What I'm hearing is that in addition to a correction for fiscal year 24, if we wanted to get 3 years out without another ask,
yep,
we'd have to ask for another 1.47 million to be comfortably covered for the next 3 years without asking for another correction.
yes.
So part of that comes to kind of a fundamental question though, is do we make that ask or do we give the information and let the towns make those decisions? That's a fundamental question to go with. Yeah.
I'm confused by, we model it out and it's clear that 3.5% is going to consistently leave us at a deficit.
Mm.
So we're talking about the potential of asking the town for that money up front. Why wouldn't we just instead be having the opposite conversation of saying 3.5%, unfortunately, is consistently not going to work? I mean,
That was brought up at collaboration.
Yeah.
So
That is another way to do, that's exactly what this conversation is about. So that would be one option.
I mean, I don't know what the towns say to that, but it seems somehow backwards to me to be asking them to cover a deficit that is only created by virtue of having a formula that is unworkable.
Having not asked
Well,
before, yeah.
Mhm.
You're asking, what the ask really is to adjust the tax base to provide them with enough revenue on town side to meet our annual growth.
right. Because the towns have regulations on how much they can increase.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah, okay.
I get that part. I'm just saying,
why are we tying
Without a separate bill,
trying to
yeah.
back? into
yeah,
something
we're
that's
tying our
clearly
hands
not
and backing into it and.
Yep.
Can I also say that this is like very high level assumptions. So it's not like we can make any decisions like right now anyway. This is just really just like a.
This isn't to
high
pick a
level.
number, it's more about directional ideas of, are we looking at a fiscal 24 concept? Are there other, we want to look beyond that? What's the school committee's forward opinion that we need so that as we move to the next, as this moves to the town phase after this budget, the towns understand what the school committee is asking for.
So to add some more context to this, PM, where would, if we went with the fast track version of Essex Elementary, which year is that coming into play here?
It could be as early as 26, 27. 26 or 27.
Talking about for a feasibility
Feasibility
study,
26.
that would just be for the feasibility portion.
So
No.
when would we be looking at?
I have
Past this.
to just look it up.
A year or two after that.
If we put in this spring and get accepted in the fall, I think it's like 18 months.
2026.
It is. Fast track, apply 23, feasibility 25, towns vote 26, potential
So we
begin
have-
27, potential end 29.
Yeah.
That's
For
the
the same time.
fastest.
And that's actually unlikely.
First
Yeah,
cost would
likely
be,
that
that would be if we applied this year. First cost would be feasibility study.
would be ideal, but
I think the thing that's not
Without
on
luck, we get
here,
in.
the thing that's not on here is just the fact that, we know on the capital side, sorry, Jake, I'll be quick, it's just that with the essentially 1.2 million going out potentially for the turf fields,
Right.
that alone is something that will make it more challenging for us to manage what we know is coming in the short term while we're waiting for Essex Elementary to be dealt with, and also to just, when we do go out for a project, be in good position to not have it cost taxpayers more money
Mhm.
because we didn't get those reserves to a healthy levels.
And what is this?
Hold on, Jake's been waiting so patiently.
so what this answers for me, which has been a question for me, and I understand these are high level assumptions and forecasts or whatever. But the claim that we could carry forward on a 3.5% assumption without needing to ask doesn't appear to hold up here. Like every year we've got a gap.
Mhm.
So either
Yes.
we've got to change the 3.5% assumption or target, and or we got to change the assumption of level services. And both of those imply that we look critically at our program to see if there is a way to do it at a lower cost while maintaining excellence, right? That's important to us. Or even enhancing excellence if that's possible. I don't know if that's possible, but maybe messing with the model, we can do that. And one thing we might need to look at is what budget numbers do we need to plug in there to get to like a 2.5 or a 3% target, right? A lower than 3.5% target. I think we should commit to at least trying to do that. I don't know if it's possible to do that, but we should at least commit to trying to do that because the 3.5 in level services can't carry us. We can't do that.
So why would you lower the number? Maybe I'm not understanding.
So
lower the
we
cost.
would need time to do that, right? To explore whether or not we can make enough program changes to reduce
Bring the
the
4.0
budget.
down to hit the 3.5 assessment.
To bring,
No, he's saying.
to bring the 4.0 district
Yep,
growth down to get a less than 3.5%
okay,
proportion
that's what I thought you were saying.
assumption.
Okay,
Okay, so whether it's
Assessment.
3 or 2.5, whatever the
apportionment.
assessment,
Mhm.
apportionment assessment is,
Assessment.
right? We would need time to explore that and certainly time to implement anything if we found a way to do it. So if we're willing to commit to that, we could potentially use that as a way to justify the ask big enough to carry us forward 3 to 4 years while we look for a longer term strategy to get more sustainable.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I'm gonna butcher some of these terms, so,
It's all right.
but if I remember from the collaboration meetings last year, like the apportionment can be like, I think, like last year Manchester was in the 2s, is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
So I actually don't, I disagree with you. I think that it's more potentially like, so if you're giving Manchester a 2.8 or whatever it is, whatever it was last year,
Mhm.
there's cost savings there. It's not like they're not still giving 3.5, there's savings there. So like, I think it's more incumbent on the towns to be like, well, you got, I mean, Manchester's, if we're sticking to a 3.5, Manchester's at 2.8, there's that 0.7 gap for multiple years. Well, then that should be accounted for and should be part of the argument that like, okay, you got these savings every single year. And I know that it ebbs and flows. I believe Essex also was under that potential
Mhm.
percentage. So that's more of an argument is like, not to say build the rainy day fund, but build the rainy day fund on the town side, because if it's lower for a few years, well, then there should be an argument that like, we need that now because now the potential apportionment has changed. I didn't get
And I think part of what we've been talking about though is getting away from solving for apportionment. That we need at this table to be talking, I mean, we talk about assessment here.
Sorry.
No, but
Yeah.
I think your
You're
point still carries. I absolutely think your point still carries. But also we need to be talking about what's good for the health of the program in the district, mindful of our towns, but not mindful of our towns in terms of, well, we're solving because Essex is up and Manchester's down and or
Mhm.
reverse. So I think that to your point, I see what you're saying. I don't know that there's going to be sentiment for such drastic restructuring that would bring us down to a 2.5 or 3 district. That would be really, maybe it's
I'm
not.
not assuming that it is drastic. I'm saying that we should explore that
Mhm.
to see if we can become more sustainable in those kind of numbers.
Has
Well,
that been
I-
explored in the
I just-
past,
but I would
rather
just
than
say, yeah, I
assume?
mean, my understanding of the past, I was just running some quick numbers on my calculator. So, no, 7 years, the average is 3.27% spending growth. So you could say, hey, well, we've hit it. I think those, the past 3 years, it's been closer to 3.5. So depending on how long you look back, but I think those who've been through the school committee conversations or remember them as a listener, remember that a lot of that involves reductions. Some of the
Yeah.
reductions
Yep,
have been things that we think we can do if there's enrollment like we have in this budget. People feel like those are smart things to do. Other of them have been reductions that we'd rather not do. Yes, it was a person who might have been retiring, but we ended up having fewer and fewer FTE and that has an impact on the program. There's been specific programs that have been removed. So I think the answer is we have been doing that. And I think what we heard and what took 3.25 over 7 years up to 3.5 over the past 3 was kind of a feeling just as a telling you what I remember hearing over the past 3 years is school committee saying, we're getting less and less comfortable with making those reductions to keep that number down, and we don't see that there's many places to go. Now, if you look at the FTE and all the budget, you'll see there's been restructurings just about every year in different things. We had the central office restructuring, we had, psychology services, we've had, the transition from class teachers to special ed, et cetera. We have the in-district programs. We have lots of things to continue to try to look at it every year, and I would say that that's a standard budgeting practice. How comfortable do I feel that we could run at a 3.25? Not that comfortable, but I would say, to your point, yeah, maybe the number could be a little below 4, but we don't know, and it's getting tighter and tighter to do. Is
And
that
maybe
a
I'm
fair
missing-
assumption? Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. We shouldn't look at ourselves in a vacuum. I think Ben did some extensive research. 3.5 is a conservative growth number for schools. 2.5 is not realistic. We can talk about program, we can talk about creative things, and there's always something creative that we can do. But the bottom line is program is people. And what we'll start to do is shave, start at the discretionary and work our
Yeah.
way in, and we'll just start to shrink the options for kids, or we'll look at inflating class size, not placing judgment on those things, but the answer to Erica's question is the answer to this problem. The removal of 2 or 3 heads here and there makes a tremendous ripple effect throughout the budget. The only way to create really long-lasting change is to figure out how to do this with fewer people. We're committed to having 4 sites. I mean, we could look at merging Manchester and Essex Elementary. That would be one way we could go about looking at containing costs. So,
Right.
but we've asked that question publicly, and there was not an interest in doing that. So I don't say that flippantly. I say
Right.
to get to that in some creative way is it will be changing our entire operation and probably our philosophy of how to do business. If we go lean into an efficiency model, we'll lean back to a more traditional approach. I would say how I've seen this play out in other districts, you also will start to dismantle your in-district programming, which will give you an initial boost financially, but will come back around to create escalating out of district expenses. So there's only, schools cost what they cost, and I don't think we're outside the range of normal.
Did you
One
want
quick question that I
hold
had
on,
before.
do you want to just close your thought on that? Because I know you have that, but we want to,
Yeah,
Give
and
everyone
I
else a
feel
chance
very
to.
uncomfortable putting forward ideas of what might be done here, and they don't all have to be negative. But what this does tell me, the chart up here, if we're asking for a pretty significant correction over whatever it is going to be this year, we're certainly going to be asking for capital consideration for Essex Elementary sometime in, towards the end of that gray zone there in 27, somewhere in there, right? So we already have asked the towns for, and potentially depending on our strategy, the years in between, right? Given the gap that's up there. Then this trend continues, right? For the years after this, we're gonna have continuous gaps. And at some point, another 3 years after 27, we're gonna have to ask for another one. This is gonna be a period of asking for regular significant corrections or overrides every 2 to 3 years. If we don't look at what we do.
I don't think that's news.
That's a normal.
That's
It's normal.
That's exactly what it's been.
Right.
The
No,
cycle
it's been 6 or 7 years, it's been 8 years, right? It's been longer than that. We're
Right, so
speeding
what
that, we're
been-
speeding that process up.
It's been abnormal the 7 years.
What's been discussed at collaboration with town partners is whether or not the philosophy could be or should be multiple scheduled 2 to 3 year small asks versus starve yourself for 10 huge asks.
Right.
And that's actively being discussed. Because I think while we all want to find a better way, there's acceptance that it's not sustainable because of the amount of revenue coming in and available to the towns to support the schools. That running a school system below 3.5%, or at least the school system, I think the strategic plan and inputs tell us that we want the plan that competes with mean, we're talking about, we're not marketing to the level of Pingree, but we're going to live at 2.5%.
Right.
Some of this just isn't realistic, and we have to decide, we can be a 2.5% school. It won't look the same, and it's not intended to be negative, it's intended to be a realistic picture of what we'll have to do to get there. Because there are only so many line items that are going to yield you significant savings.
So what I worry about is when one or more of those fails, we put ourselves in having to cut right then, rather than plan strategically for the long term.
But that's also on our town partners to be planning strategically for the long term. This is not news. And the crisis point coming now has been broadcast, at least for the last 3 years. Really clearly. I remember the same little image of the fork in the road with the arrows for the last 3 years. So yes, it is a structural problem. We're facing it, but it's not news to anybody either. Kate?
So I'm not naive enough to think that this will solve the problem, but if we're talking about enrollment as a budget, as a driver of our budget, why are we not also talking about maximizing school choice?
I mean,
another
we have
option.
looked each year at what you could do, and I think just like we look at staffing to say, could you reduce staffing without an impact to the program or class size? And that's where we have the 4 FTE. Similarly, in the spring every year, we look at school choice to say, what could you bring in without having to add additional costs such that and I think that's an annual process.
And we maximized it last year.
It went back up.
We pushed it up. I wouldn't say that we maximized
I
it.
think
If we maximized it, we wouldn't be looking at,
Well, I think we did at the
sections
middle
of-
school, because you've got the bottleneck at the middle school.
Yeah,
but
we went to
at
the
high
highest
school-
level that I thought was.
so if
That
we
was
see that we
recommended.
have 25% of our students leaving between 8th and 9th grade every year, why are we not taking 9th graders
Right.
from
Right.
taking
could
20?
focus
I
on
mean,
high
that number's been
school, yeah.
fairly consistent, right? We are always losing,
About 10 kids.
right?
You say
So
we
can
could,
we
but
not
you
be taking
haven't.
in?
Why?
What's that?
Sorry. It's a good
Right.
point. It's one I've wondered about. So, I mean, but you guys must have thought about it. Why haven't you?
I think we've had some mixed feelings about school choice and how large a number we should take. It's difficult.
It's
School-
always a gamble,
It's a
right?
gamble.
Because
School
if
choice
more
is a blind
students move
lottery.
in
So
and, yeah,
It's not like we're accepting applications, reviewing students and creating an accepted class. We're opening up a lottery. We're literally putting blind numbers in a hat and picking them out. And those are the kids that come. So we can't plan for the profile of students or the profile of the cohort that comes in. We haven't typically exceeded the percentages in terms of students with needs. But sometimes we have had kids come in and then get directly put in out of district placement, and now we become the agent. So it's just a little bit of a gamble. We can't plan for it. We don't really know what we're taking on.
wait,
we
doesn't the sending district have to?
They have to pay, but we
vacate the
manage.
District, okay.
So we still manage the case, through age 23 if necessary.
But we're at least
in-
not paying for.
We're not paying initial evaluation, things like that. So a little bit of the unknown. We did take, I want to say it was 10 kids at 9th grade last year. We also, we can go back and look at the numbers. We have kids return. Just to be perfectly honest, I think there's been a feeling like we should be winding down school choice and not escalating it from our past discussions. So we've been following suit on that with the discussion last year to up the number. I think we doubled the number of exiting kids.
So I lived through the period of the bubble classes and the extreme outrage from the public that we had too many school choice kids
Yes.
when we didn't have enough teachers and kids are in locker rooms. So I can't believe I'm actually going to say this. But I think that as we sit in this point of some, a real budget crunch, it is a gesture of goodwill, if nothing else, to show we have very few sources of revenue, right? Like there's not a lot we can look to. So if we can look to, in a very thoughtful way, increasing our school choice to bring in, an incremental amount, it's probably something we need to at least consider. And frankly, Jake, not not to discount your point, but I'd prefer to consider sources of revenue rather than cuts to programs.
We should be doing that. And I'm not saying cuts to programs by saying, looking at our program. I'm not
Well,
assuming
sure,
cuts.
we should be looking at our program. That's fair. I
And then-
guess my assumption is we have looked at our program, so.
Are we taking tuition students into our out-of-district programs?
Where there
filling?
is excess space. So in the budget, the question that we were talking about, you'll see that there's FTE being taken off the operating and being assigned.
Yep.
It's financing from tuition coming in.
Yep.
So
It's
we do have a
referenced.
KIP,
Yep.
2 kids?
It's referenced in the, I don't know the number of kids, I think it might be 2 or 3. But on the middle school page and the high school page, just that is an offset
Yeah.
already. So we try to match the revenue we get with staffing.
Do we who sets the rate for those programs?
It's set based on the cost to run the program in the public school, and then divided by the number of students that the program can hold, right? So we set, because it's a mutual support system, everyone tries to keep it to be a real cost of program and not cost of program plus profit.
Okay.
So if a program can take 8 kids, we have 1 tuition kid, 1/8 of the cost of the program is borne by that student.
Right. And it tends to be a much higher number than a school choice student.
Oh, yes.
So recognizing that maybe as a committee, we didn't quite understand or come prepared with the information that you guys were hoping to get from us tonight. Final thoughts, is there anything you'd like built in? So I will say, I sort of led with this, but I can clarify it now. I would like to see, given that our next meeting we have a meeting right before the public hearing, that is the same night. I would like to see some form of recommended stabilization contribution built in, but that's still, it's not a commitment that night, so it does still leave room for that conversation to happen at collaboration. But failing agreement and a plan moving forward on that, I believe we need that in place. So I would like to see that involved. I'm not in favor of building in a reserve replenishment at this point. I would be more in favor of keeping E&D toward replenishing at this point.
And then can we also see what school choice filled to?
Writing that down, an estimate of what we could do for school choice.
And I don't know if it's too soon, but I know foreign language was a big topic last year. So I know maybe not in the same form, but something that includes that and potentially, there was the public comment a few months ago about is it?
Library?
No,
Fine art.
the
Performing
the
arts.
performing arts.
Performing arts.
Performing arts.
Yeah.
And with the foreign language, even if it just means a grade 6 replacement, because we know that elementary program has a bigger implication of study. We know that. Jake?
So we definitely, I don't see how unless something works out in collaboration that says, yes, we'll commit to, a small thing every other year, which I don't see how that's possible, given that the past 10 years have worked a particular way, and it doesn't seem like that's changing. We should be asking for enough to get us through a certain number of years. And to do that, we need to maximize revenues, right? I doubt we're gonna be able to put a number big enough, because if it's an extra 1.5 million on top of what we're asking for just for next fiscal year, we're not gonna be able to reinstate anything. Definitely, we are moving forward with this assumption that, at least from the policy development side, that, we're trying to avoid use of reserves for operating, because we know we have big capital expenses. And, certainly the idea of having towns help us with the capital side of things, and we figure out how to shift things internally, we can certainly look at that, but that's a financing strategy to me rather than a budget request.
Yes.
So, so to me, models that show us, modeling that shows us, what is a budget ask that protects us for the next at least 3 years, if not more. Because we know that somewhere in that same time frame, 3 to 4 years, we're going to be asking for Essex Elementary. Um, I think we can't assume necessarily that the towns can commit to every year, every other year kind of correction. But maybe you work that out, that's great, but I think for now, not knowing
Well,
that
let's
answer.
just frame this in, you'd like to see modeling for that, because I'd like to see
But-
modeling
but you go
without
for it.
that. Because again, I think that there's value in letting the towns decide how they fund the next 4 years, 3 to 4 years.
And I
on
personally
their
would
own.
love to see a model that puts us at a 3% assessment target rather than 3.5, just to see what the kind of changes in the numbers, what that potential impact might be for us.
That's a different kind of modeling.
Well,
it's-
if we
it's-
set 3% will come in under our two largest budget drivers, which is personnel and healthcare. So we're automatically in the hole. I think. Am I right on that?
I'm not in favor of that as an exercise, not necessarily for the big picture, grand scheme of idealist things down the line, but in the time frame that we have.
Let me know if you need help. I do this for a living. I don't know.
I can tell you right now what the numbers are. It's,
But let's not,
we-
because it's
well,
9:30.
we modeled the
So,
3 years. The
yeah.
3 years, the 3 years are 1.5 million.
Right.
As a start,
As, right,
plus your add back,
where we are.
which is 150.
Yep.
And your takeout for school choice, it'll probably be close to 1.75.
Yeah.
And then if you
To
want to add
cover
2 more
the
years to it, 2.1-ish.
But don't you need to also build in assumptions for enrollment and how the attritions that is gonna be for over the next few years?
You'd have,
So I already did the enrollment part. I look at it in attrition with the different grades, even down to that level. So if you want help building the enrollment to help with your piece, I have
Okay.
data.
Thanks.
okay. Is there anything else critical? We're at the point of diminishing returns, folks. We are past the point of diminishing returns considerably. Is there anything, I know that was convoluted. We got started at a late hour and we're a little punchy. So does that give you what you need for
I
now?
don't know, do we, is there any, so there's no consensus, I guess is what I'm hearing.
There's.
I've got some notes and some models to build, and we'll happily go back and build them. And build based on what we think we're hearing. We're going to circle back to, the group needs to come to consensus on what it wants.
So I guess, yeah. Did we hear from everybody?
It was-
And that's the thing that we're-
To think about what everyone said. So we had some that were saying,
What do you mean
specifically by?
well, some were
Consensus
saying we have
on-
an issue on
how
like
long
3.5%, I think was a comment that you had made. Someone else might have said, how do we drive down the spending number? And, someone else I think had said, think about 2 to 3 years. So I'm just trying to,
Can I make a suggestion? Maybe I think it might be helpful because we haven't been really productive. But maybe if you guys frame a very specific question for us to think about between now and the next meeting so that we can, I'll do a better job
I
because what
think
I've
you
been,
were the most clear of everyone, so I think you nailed it, which was,
No, but
The number 3.5
feel
is the
I
problem.
feel similarly like it. I didn't feel like here's numbers and and it's like, what do you want from it? It did feel,
I
hard to
I feel
answer.
like we can give you more information if you maybe frame for us exactly what you want. And because one of the things I've been sitting here trying to figure out is also is part of the question, what do we want this program to look like? What is our dream for the program, not just a level services program, but what will we add back and what, and I know we talked about that a little last meeting too, but I think in terms of you guys walking away with a task, it might help if we came in with an organized response to specific questions.
The question is, how large do you want your budget to be?
Well, so I will take what you just said and take it one step further. That given the makeup of our committee and how we're still learning
Yeah.
to work together and learning how this works in terms of coming to consensus on anything, what may be helpful would be for you guys to make a recommendation, because we can respond to, here's what we're recommending. But when, I think we've seen over the last few months, when we have very open-ended questions, we end up with very open-ended responses.
Pam, last
We
year you
need
had
to be led,
you had
the columns.
five different.
The three columns were great.
That was great. That was super helpful.
I think we need to be led a little bit, because I think there still leaves room for us to all share our opinions, but then it also, I know you're looking to us for, well, where do you want us to go? But we're looking to you to say, what do you see for our district? This is the strategic
Yeah.
plan we've engaged in, what, you know, all this awesome, great work. What do you see as a vision for it? Will help us know what we can support. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. School committee comment?
Just one.
Yes.
Sorry. In future agendas, can we please note when and what we are gonna take a vote on?
Mhm.
Because it's particularly this packet, it was very unclear for me what I was coming in, whether or not I was just giving feedback or
Sure.
what, or what was just informational versus what I was voting on.
Yep.
So can we make that explicit on the agenda?
Yes, we can.
Motion to adjourn.
Ooh. So who wants to be the second?
Second.
Take it
Oh,
three.
the sleeper one.
Me.
They were tied.
No,
You
I
can
said
just
it.
No, I
pick your favorite.
I just figured one would be the second, one would be the first. And you could
But then
That's
he
okay.
gets your.
Matt can have it.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned at 9:35 PM.